medieval online shopping. To all those who have ever stared blankly at a website's incomprehensible return policy, who have received a package containing something utterly unexpected and possibly cursed, and especially to those who have ever attempted to order a warhorse online only to receive a gaggle of particularly aggressive geese, this book is for you. May your online shopping adventures be less fraught with peril, though hopefully just as hilariously disastrous. This dedication is also, of course, to the noble delivery pigeons of the Middle Ages, those tireless avian couriers who braved dragons, grumpy goblins, and the occasional rogue hawk to deliver our packages, albeit sometimes a bit late and sometimes with a few feathers missing. Their unwavering dedication to the craft, even in the face of such logistical nightmares, deserves a resounding round of applause, and perhaps a slightly larger supply of birdseed. Let us not forget the unsung heroes of medieval e-commerce, the blacksmith's wives, eternally hoping for a silk gown, and instead receiving enchanted thimbles, the kings, eternally frustrated by the lack of free shipping on royal tapestries, and the hapless knights, forever attempting to master the arcane art of online reviews, a task, let's be honest, that even the most seasoned warrior might find baffling. You, my brave digital shoppers of yesteryear, are a testament to the enduring human spirit and its bafflingly stubborn refusal to give up on the quest for a good deal, even when said deal is delivered via a bewildered carrier pigeon and involves a questionable amount of lizard hide masquerading as dragon skin. Your struggles, your triumphs, however minor, and your sheer comedic fortitude have inspired these pages. So raise a flagon of mead, or a lukewarm mug of something vaguely resembling coffee, depending on your era, and let the online shopping saga continue. May this book serve as a tribute, a warning, and a gloriously absurd testament to your collective folly. To you, dear readers, I humbly offer this tome, a small offering in the face of your considerable and often hilarious digital battles. And to my long-suffering editor, bless your cotton socks and thank you for your patience. You've truly earned a medal of valor, preferably made of something slightly more durable than a lizard hide. Finally, a special dedication to all those historical inaccuracies and anachronisms present within. Without you, dear inaccuracies, this book wouldn't be half as funny. I salute you. May your reign of fictional absurdity continue unchecked. Chapter 1, The Accidental Goose Order. Sir Reginald Strongforth, a knight whose prowess in battle was significantly overshadowed by his legendary appetite for roasted boar and flagons of ale, stared at the flickering candlelight illuminating his computer screen, a marvelously anachronistic contraption crafted by a particularly inventive monk, fueled by a suspiciously volatile mixture of herbs and alchemical compounds. He'd been attempting for the past 3 hours to order a warhorse. Not just any warhorse, mind you. This was to be a magnificent beast, a steed worthy of a knight of his considerable girth. He envisioned himself astride this majestic creature, a blur of shining armor and triumphant glory, finally conquering the local jousting tournament. His current mount, a rather wheezy pony named Horace, was proving less than ideal for this ambitious goal. Horace had a tendency to sneeze dramatically at inopportune moments, often resulting in Sir Reginald's unceremonious dismount. The website, Medieval Mounts and More promised a wide selection of steeds, from sturdy workhorses to battle-ready chargers. Unfortunately, the website's design, clearly inspired by the illuminated manuscripts of a particularly unhinged scribe, was more confusing than a goblin's accounting ledger. Navigating the site was like attempting to solve a particularly cryptic riddle penned by a drunken sphinx. The images were blurry. The descriptions were written in a bizarre mix of Latin, Old English, and what Sir Reginald suspected was a dialect spoken exclusively by disgruntled trolls. And then there were the pop-up ads. Oh, the pop-up ads. One particularly insistent ad featuring a disconcertingly lifelike image of a goose with surprisingly expressive eyes insisted he needed superior avian allies for unparalleled poultry protection. It promised a flock of fantastic fowl for the discerning defender. Sir Reginald, distracted by a sudden craving for goose liver pâté, absent-mindedly clicked on the ad, his finger slipping on a stray drop of spilled ale. The next thing he knew, he'd confirmed his order, not for a warhorse, but for a flock of geese, 50 of them. The delivery arrived 3 days later, not by the usual method of a sturdy cart, but via a heavily overloaded cart pulled by a rather bewildered ox, driven by a surly peasant who grumbled incessantly about the weight of the cargo and the unusually aggressive nature of his passengers. The geese, it turned out, were not merely fantastic, as the ad had promised. They were outright ferocious. They honked incessantly, pecked at anything that moved, and had already managed to demolish half of Sir Reginald's prized rose bushes, a collection he'd painstakingly cultivated over 20 years, with only a few near-death experiences involving rampant thorns and a particularly aggressive badger. Sir Reginald's castle, once a symbol of noble grandeur, or at least it had been before the recent roof collapse, was now overrun by a feathery army of feathered fury. They'd taken up residence in the grand tapestry room, leaving a trail of shredded silk and indignant squawks in their wake. They'd even managed to commandeer the royal bathtub, turning it into a rather foul-smelling communal mud bath. The castle staff, a motley crew of squires, maids, and a perpetually exasperated cook named Agnes, were running a frantic campaign of goose avoidance, dodging the winged invaders with the agility of seasoned acrobats. The cook, Agnes, a woman whose culinary skills were matched only by her ability to handle the castle's notoriously chaotic inhabitants, had taken to wearing a helmet fashioned from a discarded cooking pot, its brim adorned with strategically placed frying pans. She'd found the geese particularly adept at stealing sausages. The squires were attempting to herd the geese into the castle's stables, only to find that the geese had far more negotiating skills than the horses. They'd successfully formed a union, demanding better bedding and a daily ration of premium grain. Sir Reginald, desperate to resolve the situation, attempted to contact Medieval Mounts and More to initiate a return. Their customer service, as it turned out, was handled by a flock of carrier pigeons who apparently had a rather loose definition of reliable delivery. Several messages detailing his plight were sent, only to be returned with various notes such as eaten by hawk, lost in a storm, and a particularly cryptic message which simply stated, "Blame the badger." His attempts to personally return the geese were met with less than stellar results. He tried to coax them into a cart, only to be met with a flurry of enraged pecks, leaving him with a wardrobe of ruined fabrics. His plan to employ his trusty steed, Horace, was ultimately unsuccessful. Horace, bless his wheezing heart, simply seemed to find the chaos amusing and occasionally joined in the honking. Days turned into weeks, and the goose situation only grew worse. Sir Reginald, his once pristine armor, now adorned with goose droppings and various other avian insults, was at his wits' end. He'd tried everything: bribes, a mountain of cheese failed to appease the feathered fiends. Threats, the geese seemed remarkably unafraid of a knight who was increasingly more comfortable in his dressing gown than his armor. And even diplomacy, the geese seemed only to understand squawking and the occasional peck. He'd considered a medieval-style siege, but feared even a minor catapult malfunction might send goose feathers flying all over the kingdom. His only hope now lay in somehow, some way, convincing the carrier pigeons to actually deliver a return request. But considering their track record and the rather aggressive nature of the geese's union representatives, Sir Reginald was not entirely optimistic. The battle for his castle and his sanity was far from over. The war, it seemed, was being waged not by swords and shields, but by honking, pecking, and a significant shortage of decent cheese. The age of online shopping, it turned out, even in a medieval setting, was filled with more than its fair share of chaos. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, a rhythmic counterpoint to the hiss of the forge, was Agnes's usual lullaby. But tonight, the familiar sounds were overshadowed by a simmering frustration that threatened to boil over like a pot of forgotten stew. The air, thick with the smell of coal smoke and sweat, did little to soothe her simmering anger. Instead of the luxurious silk gown she'd ordered, a shimmering emerald green promised to sweep the floor and impress the visiting baron. She had received a box of thimbles. Not just any thimbles, mind you. These were enchanted thimbles. The website, Finery and Fancies, had promised a robe of verdant magnificence, spun from the finest threads of the silk worm, a garment fit for a queen, nay, a goddess. The illustration, however, had been less than clear. It depicted what Agnes, squinting at the blurry image on her husband's surprisingly advanced, for the time, computer screen, a contraption cobbled together from repurposed clockwork and dubious alchemy, interpreted as a dress, a very abstract, vaguely green dress. What she hadn't accounted for was the website's penchant for using archaic terms like verdurous vestment and a garment woven with the whispers of the spring zephyr. Clearly, whoever wrote the product description was less interested in accurate depiction and more keen on demonstrating their vast vocabulary of obscure medieval synonyms for dress. The thimbles themselves were unremarkable at first glance, small but silver and rather plain. Yet, as Agnes picked one up, a faint warmth spread through her thumb. It wasn't painful, more like a pleasant tingle. Then, a curious glow emanated from the tip of her thumb, a soft, ethereal light the color of a summer twilight. Her husband, Barnaby, a man whose knowledge of metallurgy far surpassed his understanding of online shopping, watched with a mixture of amusement and bewilderment. "Agnes, my love," he said, his voice laced with the gentle concern that only a blacksmith who routinely wrestled with molten metal could muster, are those glowing. Agnes, initially concerned, found the phenomenon strangely captivating. The glow intensified, pulsating faintly. Then a shiver ran down her spine, and she knew, with an unnerving certainty, that it was going to rain. Heavy rain, the kind that soaked to the bone and turned the forge's muddy courtyard into a treacherous quagmire. Barnaby, still holding his hammer, stared, momentarily forgetting the need to continue hammering the horseshoes he'd been working on. You know it's going to rain? Indeed, I do, Agnes declared, her voice imbued with the confidence that comes with suddenly possessing the ability to predict the weather. A torrential downpour, I suspect, accompanied by strong winds. It will start within the hour, and it did, with the precision of a well-oiled clockwork mechanism. Ironically, much like Barnaby's computer, the heavens opened, unleashing a deluge that turned the village into a miniature Venice. The thimbles, it turned out, were not just decorative, they were meteorological marvels. Each thimble seemed to amplify one of Agnes's senses. Her touch, enhanced by the glowing warmth, transformed into a barometer. Her hearing somehow picked up the faintest whispers of the wind. Her thumb, once only useful for gripping thimbles, now seemed a conduit to the whims of nature. The initial shock quickly gave way to a sort of giddy amazement. Agnes, clad in her everyday work clothes, a sturdy linen apron stained with charcoal and grease, watched the rain lash against the forge's windows. The Baron's visit, planned for that evening, was now undeniably postponed. The disappointment was palpable, but overshadowed by the sheer absurdity of her predicament. She had ordered a silk gown, and instead received a weather forecasting kit. Barnaby, meanwhile, was entranced. He spent the next few hours excitedly testing Agnes's newfound abilities, prodding her with questions about the weather, wind speed, rainfall, atmospheric pressure. He meticulously recorded her predictions in a ledger normally reserved for the minutiae of metalworking, with a pencil he usually used to mark horseshoe sizes. The forge, usually a haven of hard work and the rhythmic clang of metal, became an impromptu meteorological station. The initial amusement gradually gave way to a different kind of wonder. Agnes's ability to predict the weather wasn't just a parlor trick. She could feel impending storms, sense subtle shifts in atmospheric pressure, and could accurately predict the intensity and duration of rainfall. This could transform their lives. Farmers would be eternally grateful for accurate weather forecasts, ensuring the success of their harvests. Barnaby saw potential profit in this extraordinary gift, a subscription service of sorts, supplying timely weather predictions to the surrounding villages. He envisioned a flourishing business, perhaps even a dedicated weather forecasting booth at the village market, where Agnes would be the star attraction. However, the practical applications did little to diminish the fundamental injustice of the situation. Agnes was still thimble-clad, far from the shimmering emerald beauty she envisioned. She had, in a truly bizarre twist of fate, acquired the ability to predict the weather, but was still wearing the same old apron. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd traded a dress for an ability that was simultaneously astonishing and utterly inconvenient. It was a perfectly medieval sort of disaster. Barnaby, bless his practical heart, tried to make amends. He scoured his limited resources, attempting to create a makeshift gown from whatever scraps of leather and canvas were available. The result was less a flowing emerald masterpiece and more a utilitarian, somewhat stiff patchwork robe. While not quite the silk gown from finery and fancies, it did at least cover her and was quite resistant to the effects of rain or stray sparks from the forge. The incident of the enchanted thimbles added a new, if somewhat eccentric, layer to their lives. The blacksmith's forge, once a symbol of simple labor and hard work, was now a beacon of unpredictable meteorological brilliance, all thanks to a poorly written online product description and a delightfully absurd pair of enchanted thimbles. The next day, Agnes sent a strongly worded complaint to Finery and Fancies. The reply arrived via a somewhat ruffled carrier pigeon, who understandably was quite annoyed with the rain. The message, scribbled on a scrap of parchment, read simply, "We apologize for the inconvenience. Next time, specify the desired garment more clearly. Perhaps avoid using words like verdurous vestment. We are not liable for weather-related incidents resulting from magical items." Apparently, even in the age of online medieval shopping, customer service was just as frustrating as in the modern world, if a little more feathery. King Theodore, a monarch whose vanity was only surpassed by his penchant for impulsive online shopping, surveyed his reflection in a tarnished silver mirror. His crown, slightly askew, perched precariously atop his head, mirroring the precarious state of his royal finances. The upcoming royal ball demanded a robe of unparalleled magnificence, a garment worthy of a king who, it must be said, had a rather unfortunate habit of mistaking exquisite for exorbitantly priced. His chambers, usually a picture of regal splendor, were currently in a state of organized chaos. Rolls of silk, shimmering in various shades of gold, crimson, and sapphire, lay draped haphazardly over ornate chairs and priceless tapestries. Scattered amongst the fabrics were discarded sketches of potential robe designs, each more outlandish than the last, and half-eaten platters of sugared plums, testament to the king's increasingly frantic state. His advisors, a motley crew of courtiers whose primary skill lay in subtly flattering the king while simultaneously plotting their own advancement, hovered nervously at the edges of the room. Lord Bartholomew, a man whose obsequiousness was only exceeded by his penchant for gossip, cleared his throat delicately. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice a smooth, honeyed concoction designed to soothe the royal beast, "are we certain this acquisition from Dragonscale Emporium is entirely reputable?" King Theodore, distracted by the latest notification on his surprisingly advanced for the time royal tablet, a device powered by a complex network of enchanted gears and questionable alchemy, waved a dismissive hand. "Reputable? Bartholomew, my dear fellow, Dragonscale Emporium boasts dragonskin robes. Imagine a robe woven from the very scales of a dragon, unsurpassed in its magnificence, its resilience, and its, fire resistance." He paused, his brow furrowing slightly as he reread the product description. "Although," he mused, "I do find it curious that they offer a lifetime guarantee against excessive charring." Sir Reginald, a knight more accustomed to jousting tournaments than online shopping, ventured a hesitant comment. Your Majesty, might I suggest perhaps a less flammable alternative? Several reputable artisans in the kingdom. Theodore cut him off with a regal wave. Reginald, my friend, where is the thrill in reputable? Where is the grandeur, the undeniable wow factor? This is not just a robe, Reginald. This is a statement that screams, I, King Theodore, am a man of impeccable taste who can afford to burn through a fortune on incredibly expensive lizard skins. The advisors exchanged uneasy glances. Bartholomew, ever the pragmatist, had already started mentally calculating the potential cost of replacing the royal treasury's depleted coffers. The king, caught up in the digital allure of Dragon Scale Emporium, had clearly missed the fine print detailing the rather dubious origins of their dragon skin. The delivery, when it arrived, was underwhelming. Instead of a majestic dragon skin robe carried by a retinue of strong men, a single, rather bedraggled delivery pigeon landed on the windowsill, clutching a small, suspiciously lightweight package. The pigeon, clearly annoyed with the weight of its precious cargo, let out a series of disgruntled coos before dropping the package and promptly flying away. Theodore, his anticipation reaching fever pitch, ripped open the package with the fervor of a hungry wolf tearing into a succulent leg of lamb. Inside, nestled amongst layers of surprisingly fragrant straw, was a robe made, it appeared, not from dragon skin, but from something remarkably similar to lizard skin. Very, very convincing lizard skin, to be sure. The scales shimmered, the texture was surprisingly lifelike, and the color, a rather fetching shade of burnt orange, was undeniably eye-catching. His initial reaction was one of bewildered silence. Then, a slow burn, a royal inferno of fury, began to consume him. Lizard skin? They dared to sell me lizard skin, and for that price, my treasury could have funded a small army with that sum. Bartholomew, the king's voice boomed through the chambers, shaking the very foundations of the castle. Bartholomew, already expecting the inevitable, bowed low, his face a mask of carefully controlled panic. Your Majesty, he began, his voice trembling slightly. Perhaps we could overlook this minor discrepancy? Overlook it? Overlook the blatant fraud, the insulting deception, the lizardness of it all? No, Bartholomew, no. This calls for a royal decree, a royal investigation, and a royal return policy. He threw the offending lizard skin garment to the floor, where it lay in a crumpled heap, a testament to the king's outrage and the pitfalls of online shopping in the medieval era. The courtiers, sensing the shift in the royal mood from incandescent rage to focused determination, began to whisper amongst themselves. Lord Percival, known for his shrewd business acumen, suggested contacting the merchant, demanding a full refund and possibly some compensation for the king's emotional distress. Lady Beatrice, ever the pragmatist, pointed out that they could easily repurpose the lizard skin robe as a very unusual tapestry. The ensuing chaos involved frantic correspondence with Dragon Scale Emporium via increasingly frantic pigeons, several tense negotiations involving the royal solicitor, who surprisingly was quite familiar with the intricacies of medieval online consumer protection laws, and a small-scale revolt amongst the royal kitchen staff when the king declared a royal fast in protest against the lizard skin fiasco. The upcoming royal ball was in jeopardy. The king's temper was still volatile, and the future of the royal finances was more uncertain than ever, all because of a slightly misleading online advertisement and a king with a penchant for purchasing things he shouldn't. The saga of King Theodore and his ill-fated quest for a royal robe was far from over. The aftermath of the lizard skin debacle left King Theodore in a foul mood, a mood only slightly improved by the arrival of a particularly plump goose, a stray from Sir Reginald's accidental order. The goose, seemingly unfazed by the royal tantrum, waddled around the discarded robe, pecking at the suspiciously shiny scales. This unexpected avian interlude, however, was quickly overshadowed by a far more pressing matter. A frantic knocking echoed through the castle gates, announcing the arrival of Barnaby Buckleberry, a traveling merchant whose usually jovial demeanor was replaced by a pallor that could rival the royal ghost stories. Barnaby, a man whose cart usually overflowed with exotic spices and questionable potions, now clutched a rather ornate, albeit rather ominous-looking mace. "Your Majesty," he gasped, nearly collapsing at the king's feet. I require your assistance. A most peculiar predicament." Theodore, still nursing his wounds, both emotional and financial, eyed Barnaby and his mace with a weary skepticism. "Another online shopping catastrophe, Barnaby? Pray, tell me it's not another dragon skin or lizard skin incident." Barnaby shook his head vehemently. "No, your Majesty. This is far worse. A cursed mace. I purchased it online from Mystical Market Mayhem, a site I should have known better than to trust after they misspelled incense as incense thrice in their product description." He presented the mace, a wicked-looking weapon crafted from blackened iron, etched with runes that seemed to writhe before one's eyes. A faint, almost imperceptible hum emanated from it, a vibration that sent a shiver down Theodore's spine. Even the plump goose seemed to sense the danger, retreating hastily to the safety of a nearby tapestry. "Cursed, you say?" Theodore raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And pray, what exactly does this curse entail?" Barnaby launched into a breathless account of his ill-fated purchase. He'd been browsing Mystical Market Mayhem late one night, seeking a new weapon for his self-defense, mostly against overly aggressive squirrels, he confessed, when he stumbled upon the mace. The description promised unmatched power and a unique ability to discourage unwanted advances from goblins, gremlins, and overly familiar tax collectors. The price, however, was a steep one, a king's ransom, in fact. But Barnaby, seduced by the promise of goblin deterrence, had splurged. The delivery, he explained, had arrived under rather peculiar circumstances. A pack of mischievous pixies, apparently tasked with the delivery, had managed to drop the mace several times before depositing it with a rude giggle into his cart. It was only after unpacking it that Barnaby realized he had acquired more than he bargained for. First, it seemed, had come the talking turnips. Not just any talking turnips, mind you, but exceptionally eloquent, highly opinionated talking turnips with a penchant for debating the finer points of medieval agricultural policy. Then came the spontaneous generation of gnomes in his pantry. Not the cute, cheerful gnomes of children's stories, but grumpy, perpetually scowling gnomes obsessed with collecting bottle caps. And finally, the worst of all, the uncontrollable itching, a pervasive, relentless itch that affected everyone who came within 20 feet of the cursed mace. "So you want to return it?" Theodore finally interjected, barely suppressing a chuckle. "To mystical market mayhem. I trust they have a liberal return policy concerning cursed artifacts." "They do, Your Majesty, but there's a catch," Barnaby groaned, slumping onto a nearby stool. "The return policy necessitates a series of rituals, a journey to the Whispering Woods, and the appeasement of Grumblesnore, the grumpy woodland sprite who oversees returns. The Whispering Woods, notorious for its labyrinthine paths, its surprisingly aggressive flora, and its generally unpleasant inhabitants, was not a place one wished to visit lightly. But Barnaby, desperate to rid himself of the cursed mace and the increasingly irritating retinue of talking turnips, gnomes, and uncontrollable itching, was determined to give it a try. Theodore, ever the opportunist, saw a chance for amusement. "I shall accompany you, Barnaby. This sounds like an adventure worthy of a king, even if it involves less dragon skin and more grumpy sprites." And so, the king, accompanied by the hapless Barnaby, his perpetually itching retinue, and the ever-present, surprisingly observant goose, embarked on a journey to the Whispering Woods. The journey itself was a comedy of errors. They encountered several bands of suspiciously cheerful bandits, who surprisingly were only interested in trading turnips for bottle caps, and a troupe of traveling minstrels who serenaded them with songs about the perils of online shopping, mostly focusing on the unreliable delivery services of enchanted ravens. The Whispering Woods proved to be even more chaotic than the rumors suggested. The trees seemed to whisper secrets, the paths twisted and turned in perplexing ways, and every bush contained a grumpy sprite or two. They were ambushed by grumpy mushrooms that demanded apologies for stepping on them, confronted by moss people obsessed with obscure fungal trivia, and narrowly avoided a full-blown war between the talking turnips and the bottle cap collecting gnomes. Finally, after countless trials and tribulations, they reached Grumblesnore's grotto, a dank, damp cave decorated with discarded bottle caps and strangely sentient toadstools. Grumblesnore himself proved to be even more irritable than his reputation suggested. He demanded a series of increasingly ridiculous rituals, including a song composed entirely in Pig Latin, a dance performed using only a single cabbage leaf, and the offering of a particularly rare species of blue mushroom. Barnaby, already exhausted from the journey and the incessant itching, managed to complete all the tasks with a surprising amount of help from the goose, whose unexpected talents in cabbage leaf ballet proved invaluable. Grumblesnore, somewhat mollified by the performance, reluctantly accepted the mace, and with a grumpy sigh, banished it back to the digital abyss from whence it came. The return of the cursed mace brought an end to the talking turnips, the gnomes, and the itching, though not without leaving an unusual amount of bottle caps in the royal treasury. The adventure had been exhausting, certainly, but also undeniably amusing. King Theodore, despite a minor outbreak of the uncontrollable itching, which the royal physician attributed to stress, found the whole experience rather exhilarating. He learned a valuable lesson that day: not to trust online merchants who misspelled incense, and certainly to steer clear of any mystical market offering particularly ominous weapons, and perhaps to stick to reputable and non-flammable robes, even if they lacked the wow factor. The goose, on the other hand, seemed quite pleased with itself and its newly acquired reputation as a champion of cabbage leaf ballet. The saga of medieval online shopping, however, was far from over. Bartholomew, a pigeon of discerning taste, mostly for discarded breadcrumbs and the occasional shiny button, was having a truly terrible day. Not just a bad day, mind you, but a day that would make even the most seasoned griffin contemplate early retirement. It all started, as most of Bartholomew's bad days did, with an overflowing satchel. Today's load was particularly monstrous, a veritable Everest of online orders destined for various points across the kingdom. There was a rather temperamental-sounding lute for a knight known for his questionable musical talent and equally questionable hygiene, a shipment of suspiciously shimmering hairpins for the queen, who, according to rumor, was attempting to revive the elaborate hairstyles of the 4th century, and a rather large crate labeled "Caution" contains extremely irritable gnomes. Bartholomew harbored a deep-seated suspicion about the contents of that particular crate, a suspicion reinforced by the faint yet distinct smell of fermented cabbage emanating from its porous wooden slats. His first challenge came in the form of a flock of particularly aggressive geese. These weren't your average garden variety geese. Oh no, these were geese with a vendetta, likely fueled by a lifetime of being forced to model for particularly unflattering tapestries depicting idealized rural scenes. They surrounded Bartholomew, hissing and flapping their wings with alarming ferocity, their beady eyes fixed on his bulging satchel. Bartholomew, a creature of peace and predominantly bread-based sustenance, attempted diplomacy. "Good morning, esteemed avian friends," he cooed, hoping his voice would be soothing enough to calm their ruffled feathers. The geese responded by honking derisively, their beaks snapping in a clear indication that diplomacy was not on their agenda. A frantic flapping of wings and a series of expertly executed evasive maneuvers later, Bartholomew managed to escape with his satchel intact, though his feathers were decidedly ruffled and his dignity had taken a serious hit. He'd lost a few choice breadcrumbs in the process, a tragic loss that he mourned silently, vowing revenge on the goose cartel responsible for this culinary tragedy. He was, however, making good time. That is, until he encountered the dragon. Not just any dragon, but a particularly territorial and grumpy one, currently engaged in a heated standoff with a squirrel over a particularly plump acorn. Bartholomew had learned, from years of navigating the aerial highways of the medieval kingdom, to avoid dragons at all costs. This one, however, blocked his flight path completely. To make matters worse, the squirrel, clearly aware of Bartholomew's predicament, launched into a series of high-pitched squeaks, seemingly encouraging the dragon to incinerate the unfortunate pigeon. Bartholomew, drawing on his extensive experience in avoiding potentially fatal situations, employed a tactic he'd learned from a particularly cunning rat: distraction. He began singing, not beautifully, but with a volume that could shatter glass and possibly eardrums. It wasn't a particularly melodious song, more of a raucous warbling that somehow managed to sound both mournful and vaguely insulting. The dragon, clearly unimpressed by Bartholomew's vocal performance, paused in its acorn-related conflict, seemingly more annoyed by the pigeon's song than the squirrel's taunting. This gave Bartholomew the split-second opportunity he needed to zoom past the dragon, leaving the grumpy reptile and the victorious squirrel to their argument over the acorn. As Bartholomew navigated the treacherous mountain passes, a feat even more difficult, with a satchel as heavy as his, the ever-present threat of hawk attack loomed large. The hawks, as it turned out, were particularly fond of pigeons, and not in the affectionate, "I'll give you some birdseed" kind of way. They saw Bartholomew as a delicious, winged snack. Bartholomew, remembering a particularly disturbing documentary he'd seen about the digestive system of hawks, was determined to remain a snack only in the figurative sense. His internal monologue, usually filled with witty observations about the absurdity of his job, now veered into a rather panicky self-preservation mode. Must not become hawk food, he muttered, his wings beating frantically as he weaved through craggy mountain peaks. He even considered dropping the gnomes to lighten the load, but then reasoned they'd probably cause more trouble on the ground than in the air, given their known penchant for anarchy and their even more pronounced dislike of open spaces. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of near-death experiences, perilous flight paths, and the constant threat of indigestion, Bartholomew reached his final destination, a bustling medieval town where his various deliveries were eagerly awaited. The delivery of the lute to the knight was met with a surprisingly enthusiastic, if slightly off-key, rendition of a celebratory ballad. The queen's hairpins were received with a shriek of delight that could be heard throughout the palace. The gnomes, however, proved to be considerably more challenging. Their release from the crate was accompanied by a cacophony of angry shouts and an alarming display of tiny gnome-sized weaponry, mostly sharpened acorns and exceptionally angry bottle caps. Bartholomew, exhausted but relieved to have survived his ordeal, took flight, leaving the gnomes to unleash their fury on the unsuspecting townspeople. As he soared above the town, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Bartholomew reflected on his day. It had been utterly dreadful, yet also, in its own absurd way, strangely exhilarating. He knew one thing for certain. He'd be adding a hazard pay clause to his next contract negotiations, and perhaps investing in a good pair of noise-canceling earmuffs. Chapter 2: The Rise of the Goblin Return Policy. Grungle adjusted his spectacles, a tiny, intricately carved pair perched precariously on his bulbous nose. He tapped a meticulously crafted quill against a ledger filled with spidery goblin script, a document detailing his recent and highly unfortunate purchase, a cursed helmet. The helmet, advertised as a bargain, promised unparalleled protection against minor inconveniences and occasional dragon fire. What the advertisement failed to mention, however, was the helmet's tendency to spontaneously combust, leaving its wearer smelling faintly of burnt toast and slightly singed eyebrows. Grungle, a goblin of refined tastes and surprisingly high standards when it came to personal safety, found this rather unacceptable. His current predicament was less about the fiery mishaps and more about the infuriatingly complex return policy. He'd spent the better part of the week navigating the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the online marketplace, medieval market mayhem, a site notorious for its vague terms and conditions, written in an archaic dialect that even the most scholarly goblins struggled to decipher. The website itself was a marvel of medieval technological achievement, though one that frequently crashed, displaying an error message that simply read, "The sprites are having a tea party. Please try again later." Grungle's goblin settlement, surprisingly organized for a community known for its penchant for chaos, was a study in contrast to the more formal human town. Neatly stacked mushroom houses lined cobblestone streets, each dwelling displaying a carefully crafted sign indicating its resident's profession. Grungle, a purveyor of fine cheeses and advocate for consumer rights. Fizzlewick, specialist in goblin hair removal, and Blorf, purveyor of slightly used spoons. Here, everyone knew their place, a stark contrast to the human world. In contrast to the humans' intricate bureaucratic system, the goblins had their own unique approach. A town meeting was usually a particular free-for-all of shouts and hurled acorns. But for matters of serious import, like Grungle's helmet debacle, there was a surprisingly formal process. A series of grunts and whistles, an intricate dance involving a surprisingly nimble toad, and a formal inspection of Grungle's meticulously prepared complaint were required before they agreed on a plan of action. Grungle's ledger detailed everything: the date of purchase, the item description, which Grungle had annotated with several choice goblin curses, the screenshots of the misleading advertisement, taken with a device crafted from a firefly and a polished beetle shell, and most importantly, a detailed account of the helmet's combustion incidents. Each entry included the time, the intensity of the combustion, rated on a scale of mild toastiness to full-on inferno, and the amount of cheese he'd lost due to the ensuing fire. His first hurdle was the delivery back to the online marketplace. Bartholomew, still recovering from his brush with geese, dragons, and the gnomes, was absolutely not interested in making another delivery, particularly one involving potentially explosive goblin merchandise. Therefore, Grungle had to resort to more unconventional means, a system of meticulously trained badgers. The badgers, surprisingly adept at navigating the treacherous terrain between the goblin settlement and the human town, carried the helmet, encased in a lead-lined box, a precaution Grungle deemed absolutely necessary, toward its destination. The second challenge was the human bureaucracy. The human town, a picture of ordered chaos, in comparison to the goblin settlement, was a maze of confusing rules and regulations. Grungle, having studied human customs for years, mainly for the purpose of improving his cheese-making techniques, was well versed in their rituals. However, navigating the town hall was a completely different matter. The town hall meeting was an absolute spectacle. The mayor, a portly man with a perpetually flustered expression, struggled to maintain order as Grungle, wielding his ledger like a weapon, passionately explained his grievances. The other townspeople, initially amused, were growing increasingly agitated by Grungle's detailed account of the helmet's various self-immolations. Grungle's presentation was a masterpiece of goblin logic and dramatic flair. He used diagrams made from moldy cheese to illustrate the helmet's trajectory during its spontaneous combustion incidents. He even reenacted one of the incidents, resulting in a minor conflagration in the middle of the meeting. The mayor attempted to calm him down, but Grungle was on a roll, quoting obscure clauses from the medieval market mayhem's terms of service. The other townspeople began to take sides, some in favor of Grungle's plea, others annoyed by the interruption of their regular town business. A heated debate erupted, with arguments about goblin rights, human responsibilities, and the appropriate compensation for burnt cheese. The room descended into absolute pandemonium. Despite the chaos, Grungle's meticulous record-keeping and his passionate defense of his consumer rights eventually swayed the mayor. The meeting concluded with a surprisingly generous refund, a significant amount of gold coins, and a year's supply of fine cheeses, a formal apology from medieval market mayhem, delivered via an increasingly exasperated Bartholomew, and a new, less explosive helmet, though Grungle opted for a sturdy, if less glamorous, bucket helmet instead. Grungle, triumphant, returned to his settlement, a hero to his fellow goblins, having successfully navigated the treacherous waters of medieval online shopping's return policy. He then promptly consumed a large portion of his newly acquired cheese, celebrating a hard-fought victory. The tale of Grungle and the cursed helmet became a legend amongst goblins, a cautionary tale about the perils of online shopping and a testament to the power of meticulous record-keeping. It also served as a reminder that even in the most chaotic of situations, a well-prepared goblin could achieve the impossible, and perhaps, most importantly, the importance of thoroughly reading the fine print, even if that fine print was written in a confusing medieval dialect. Agnes, the blacksmith's wife, stared at the 12 enchanted thimbles scattered across her workbench, a chaotic constellation of shimmering silver. They weren't just predicting the weather, as the rather vague online description had promised. Oh no, these thimbles were far more enthusiastic in their magical pronouncements. A sudden gust of wind, powerful enough to extinguish the forge's fire, had accompanied the thimble's prediction of an impending squall. A thimble predicting a sunny afternoon had inexplicably caused a flock of sheep to spontaneously sprout wings, leading to a rather surreal and woolly airborne ballet over the village. The thimble predicting a mild drizzle, however, had unleashed a torrent of molasses from the heavens, coating the entire village in a sticky, sweet, and utterly infuriating layer of treacle. Agnes, covered head to toe in the gooey substance, had spent the better part of the morning using a rusty shovel to liberate the village cat from its sticky prison. The cat, understandably disgruntled, had retaliated by using Agnes's hair as a climbing frame. The initial thrill of possessing enchanted objects was rapidly waning. Agnes's excitement was replaced by a growing sense of dread, a feeling only slightly mitigated by the fact that the molasses incident had attracted a surprising number of honeybees, which she was currently trying to gently coax away from her hair using a rather delicate sprig of rosemary. The chaos escalated. A thimble predicting a peaceful evening had somehow summoned a troupe of traveling minstrels, their music a cacophony of off-key flutes and clashing cymbals, which only stopped when Agnes threatened them with a red-hot poker. Another thimble, forecasting a pleasant breeze, caused her husband Barnaby to unexpectedly levitate 3 feet off the ground, his beard billowing in the wind as he shrieked in terror. Barnaby landed safely, but not before narrowly avoiding a collision with the village well. Agnes, in between attempting to rescue Barnaby and untangle the cat from her hair, began to suspect that the enchanted thimbles were less about accurate weather prediction and more about a rather mischievous form of magical mayhem. As if to confirm her suspicions, one of the thimbles began to glow with an ominous purple light. This one, Agnes noted with a shudder, was predicting a significant social event. This foreboding prediction coincided with the arrival of Lord Percival, a pompous nobleman known for his extravagant parties and even more extravagant demands. His visit was always a significant social event of a kind, one that usually involved demands for exceptionally large quantities of Barnaby's best ironwork and Agnes's finest apple tarts, which were already proving themselves exceptionally difficult to make with a village covered in molasses. This time, however, Lord Percival seemed more interested in the peculiar occurrences that had been plaguing the village. Lord Percival, decked out in his finest velvet doublet and sporting in expressions of extreme curiosity, watched with wide eyes as Agnes attempted to control the thimbles. He'd heard rumors of the enchanted weather-predicting thimbles, but the sheer chaos they were unleashing was beyond anything he could have imagined. The molasses incident had certainly made for an unforgettable spectacle, he admitted, even surpassing the time his pet parrot had learned to recite Chaucer. "Remarkable," Lord Percival exclaimed, his voice echoing through the forge. "These thimbles, they possess a power beyond the mundane. I must, simply must, acquire them." Agnes eyed him with suspicion. She knew that Lord Percival's idea of acquiring something usually involved a rather heavy-handed application of his considerable wealth and an even more considerable arrogance. She certainly wasn't ready to part with her mischievous, molasses-summoning, sheep-wing-producing thimbles, especially given the amount of chaos they were capable of creating. She quickly shoved them into a hidden compartment beneath her workbench, hoping that they wouldn't decide to conjure a plague of locusts, or perhaps a sudden eruption of volcanoes in protest. However, the enchanted thimbles had other plans. As Lord Percival began to negotiate, by which Agnes meant aggressively demand, ownership of the thimbles, one of them decided to intervene, creating a shower of miniature golden acorns, which landed directly in Lord Percival's goblet of wine. The acorns, despite their seemingly benign nature, imbued the wine with a rather potent effect. Within moments, Lord Percival was dancing a jig, his elegant velvet doublet wildly flapping in the air, while reciting poetry in a surprisingly high-pitched voice. The normally dignified nobleman's sudden transformation into a whimsical, wine-soaked bard managed to amuse and astonish everyone present. This unforeseen side effect of the thimbles offered Agnes a stroke of luck. While Lord Percival was preoccupied with his newfound poetic tendencies, Agnes subtly manipulated a thimble to predict a very large and very sudden downpour. The storm arrived with dramatic flair, conveniently washing away the remnants of the molasses and distracting Lord Percival with the spectacle of a torrential downpour. By the time the storm passed, and Lord Percival, now slightly damp but considerably calmer, finally left, Agnes had realized the unpredictable power of her enchanted thimbles. They were not just weather predictors, they were unpredictable agents of chaos, capable of both disaster and unexpected comedic relief. She resolved to continue using them cautiously, perhaps with a much needed update on the terms and conditions, or at least a better understanding of their surprisingly temperamental magic. After all, who knew what other unexpected side effects awaited now that she'd managed to survive the molasses, the flying sheep, and the drunken poetry spouting Lord Percival? The next weather prediction, she noticed, read minor apocalypse. She decided to make a very large pot of tea. Sir Reginald slammed his fist on the oaken table, scattering quill pens and half-eaten gooseberries across the polished surface. The remnants of his disastrous online order, a flock of exceptionally aggressive geese, honked indignantly from the courtyard below, their incessant squabbling a constant feathered torment. He had envisioned a magnificent warhorse, a steed worthy of a knight of his stature. Instead, he'd received a gaggle of feathered fiends, more interested in uprooting his prize-winning cabbages than participating in any form of valiant battle. The online merchant, a shadowy figure known only as Bartholomew the Bold, a name Sir Reginald now suspected was profoundly ironic, remained unrepentant. His terse response to Sir Reginald's furious complaint had simply been, "All sales final. Geese are non-refundable." The audacity, the sheer, goose-infused gall. Revenge, Sir Reginald decided, was the only suitable response. He would craft a plan so devious, so cunning, so utterly brilliant, that Bartholomew the Bold would regret the day he dared cross a knight of his renown. His plan, meticulously hatched over several flagons of ale and possibly a questionable amount of cheese, involved a meticulously crafted counterorder. He would order a vast quantity of something utterly useless to Bartholomew, something that would clog his virtual warehouse, overwhelm his delivery pigeons, and ultimately bankrupt the unscrupulous merchant. His choice? 1,000 exquisitely carved miniature wooden spoons. Not just any spoons, mind you. These would be spoons of unparalleled craftsmanship, each meticulously detailed, each a tiny masterpiece of wood carving. They would be so exquisitely crafted, so utterly pointless in their miniature glory, that Bartholomew would be forced to spend his days sorting them, cataloging them, and ultimately weeping over their sheer, overwhelming uselessness. The order was placed with a flourish, a triumphant chuckle escaping Sir Reginald's lips. He imagined Bartholomew's face, contorted in a mixture of bewilderment and despair as the delivery pigeons arrived, their tiny legs burdened by the sheer weight of 1,000 tiny, perfectly crafted spoons. He pictured the merchant, surrounded by mountains of miniature cutlery, his once proud online empire crumbling beneath the weight of his own ill-gotten gains. Sweet, sweet revenge. However, Sir Reginald's strategic brilliance, like a poorly trained warhorse, proved surprisingly susceptible to unforeseen circumstances. First, there was the issue of payment. The online payment system, a rather rudimentary system involving coded messages delivered by carrier pigeon, was not designed for such a large-scale transaction. The sheer volume of gold coins required to purchase 1,000 miniature spoons prompted a flurry of confused squawks from the message-carrying pigeons, resulting in a considerable delay. Then there was the minor detail of the artisans. Sir Reginald had underestimated the difficulty of finding 1,000 woodcarvers willing to spend their days crafting miniature spoons. His initial attempts involved a rather aggressive recruitment drive, which inadvertently resulted in a village-wide spoon carving competition, culminating in a chaotic brawl involving a rather large amount of sawdust and a surprising number of splintered thumbs. The delivery, when it finally arrived, proved even more chaotic than Sir Reginald had anticipated. The 1,000 tiny spoons, packed into a colossal oak crate, arrived not via the usual fleet of carrier pigeons, but on the back of a bewildered ox, its horns adorned with miniature spoon-shaped flags. The ox, clearly overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the delivery, promptly collapsed in a heap in Bartholomew's courtyard, unleashing a cascade of miniature spoons across the cobblestones. Bartholomew, far from being overwhelmed with despair, was instead amused. He found the sheer absurdity of the situation utterly hilarious. The sight of an ox burdened with 1,000 miniature spoons was, he admitted, far more entertaining than any amount of gold could buy. He'd even commissioned a local artist to paint a commemorative picture of the incident, which now hung proudly above his fireplace. Moreover, far from bankrupting Bartholomew, Sir Reginald's 1,000 tiny spoons proved surprisingly popular. They were marketed as the spoons of Sir Reginald's regret, and sold out within days as novelty items for wealthy nobles with a penchant for whimsical trinkets. Bartholomew's business boomed, fueled by the accidental success of Sir Reginald's revenge. Sir Reginald, meanwhile, was left with a mountain of unpaid bills from his impulsive order, a severely depleted treasury, and a renewed appreciation for the unpredictable nature of online shopping, particularly when one's revenge scheme involves 1,000 tiny, utterly useless wooden spoons and a disgruntled ox. He decided a simpler approach was needed, and his next revenge plot would involve significantly less artisanal woodwork and significantly more geese. He'd learn how to cook them, maybe, after a suitable amount of brooding, naturally. The geese, however, remained decidedly unimpressed. Their honking intensified. The news spread through the village like wildfire, or perhaps more accurately, like a particularly vigorous gust of wind carrying a flock of particularly aggressive geese. A sorcerer, residing in a ramshackle hut on the outskirts of town, had been mistaken for the legendary Merlin. This wasn't entirely his fault. He did possess a rather impressive beard, a penchant for dramatic pronouncements, and a disturbingly large collection of bubbling cauldrons. However, his magical prowess was less legendary wizard and more enthusiastic amateur with a questionable understanding of causality. This particular amateur, whose name was actually Cuthbert, though he preferred Cuthbert the Magnificent, a title he felt was far more befitting of his ambitions, had decided to tackle the village's most pressing problem, the unreliability of medieval online shopping. He'd heard tales of Sir Reginald's goose-infested woes, the blacksmith's wife's enchanted thimbles, and numerous other shopping catastrophes. Determined to improve things, Cuthbert retreated to his workshop, a chaotic space crammed with strange devices, half-finished spells, and enough questionable ingredients to make a dragon sneeze. His workshop was a symphony of chaos. Shelves overflowed with jars filled with viscous liquids that shimmered with an unsettling inner light. Bizarre contraptions, cobbled together from bones, brass, and what looked suspiciously like enchanted turnips hummed and whirred. The air itself crackled with barely contained magical energy, punctuated by the occasional pop and fizz of an exploding potion. Cuthbert, amidst this controlled pandemonium, surveyed his tools with a determined glint in his eye. He intended to use his magic to create the perfect online shopping experience. No more delayed deliveries, no more wrong items, no more aggressive geese. His plan, scribbled on a scroll in spidery lettering, involved a complex series of enchantments designed to expedite deliveries, magically verify orders, and ensure that every customer received precisely what they ordered. He believed it was simple. All he needed to do was tweak the very fabric of reality, ensuring the perfect flow of online purchases, magically guided by the spirits of ancient delivery pigeons. His first attempt involved a rather ambitious spell to magically accelerate the speed of carrier pigeons. He envisioned a whirlwind of feathered messengers zipping across the countryside at impossible speeds, delivering orders within minutes. The reality, however, was somewhat less refined. The pigeons, supercharged by Cuthbert's magic, flew so fast they became blurs, leaving trails of shimmering feathers and confused peasant farmers in their wake. Several orders arrived simultaneously, resulting in a colossal pileup at Bartholomew the Bold's virtual warehouse. Next, he attempted to create a magical verification system to prevent incorrect items from being delivered. He conjured a shimmering orb that was supposed to analyze orders and guarantee accuracy. The orb, however, proved to have a mind of its own. It seemed to have developed a rather perverse sense of humor, frequently switching orders at random, leading to a knight receiving a shipment of knitting needles, a baker getting a set of chainmail, and a rather unfortunate tax collector getting a lifetime supply of extremely pungent cheese. His attempt to improve customer service resulted in a swarm of miniature, magically enhanced squirrels delivering helpful and incredibly annoying advice in tiny, high-pitched voices. They swarmed the villagers, chirping unhelpful suggestions about which type of cabbage would pair best with enchanted thimbles, while simultaneously nibbling at the edges of important documents. In a final, desperate attempt, Cuthbert tried to enchant the internet itself, or what passed for the internet in this medieval world, a complex network of carrier pigeons and coded messages. He chanted incantations, waving his wand and sprinkling various powders into the air. The result was spectacular. The digital network, if it can be called that, momentarily overloaded. Bartholomew the Bold's website briefly morphed into a giant, animated goose, honking incessantly before reverting to its normal form, leaving a lingering image of a feathered fowl wearing a tiny crown. Cuthbert, covered in soot and slightly singed, surveyed the chaos he had created. His ambitious plan had backfired spectacularly. His magical enhancements had only exacerbated the already chaotic nature of medieval online shopping. The villagers, initially hopeful, were now more confused and frustrated than ever. Sir Reginald, still embroiled in his ongoing battle with the geese, simply sighed and ordered another crate of ale. Bartholomew, however, was fascinated by the unexpected publicity, and the bizarre incident became the stuff of legend. He decided to commemorate the event by adding a new product to his online store, Cuthbert's Chaos Collection. It included enchanted thimbles, tiny overly helpful squirrels, and of course, a very large quantity of extremely pungent cheese. The collection sold out within the day. Cuthbert, meanwhile, retreated to his workshop, vowing to stick to more manageable magic in the future. Maybe he'd focus on perfecting his self-stirring cauldron. Or perhaps, he thought, he could finally get around to cleaning the dragon scales he'd accidentally enchanted into his favorite teacups. The world of medieval online shopping was, he concluded, perhaps better left to the chaos of the marketplace and the whims of carrier pigeons. He resolved to return to his previous pursuits, brewing rather dubious potions and collecting particularly unusual toadstools. After all, even a magnificent Cuthbert has his limits, and at least the toadstools were unlikely to attempt to return a cursed helmet. Yet, the aftermath of Cuthbert's ill-fated attempts to improve medieval online shopping left the village in a state of bewildered chaos. Sir Reginald was still battling a particularly aggressive goose. The leader of the flock, he'd determined, possessed an unnerving intelligence and a penchant for jousting with garden gnomes. The blacksmith's wife continued to receive unsolicited shipments of enchanted thimbles, which surprisingly she was finding quite useful for mending her husband's increasingly holy socks. And Cuthbert, well, Cuthbert was back to brewing dubious potions and collecting particularly unusual toadstools. But amidst the lingering chaos, something unexpected was brewing. The great medieval online shopping convention, the brainchild of Bartholomew the Bold, the surprisingly shrewd merchant who owned the aforementioned online store, which had, against all odds, somehow survived Cuthbert's digital demolition derby. The convention was conceived as a way to boost sales and, more importantly, make amends for the recent shipping calamities. The location, the village's large market square, transformed for the occasion into a bustling convention center. Stalls were erected, each adorned with banners proclaiming the virtues of various wares, from self-stirring cauldrons, a direct response to Cuthbert's failed ambitions, to magically self-cleaning chainmail, a surprisingly popular item, to enchanted socks that never got smelly, a godsend for knights who spent their days in armor. The opening ceremony was a spectacle to behold. Bartholomew, dressed in a ridiculously extravagant velvet robe, addressed the crowd, which included knights, peasants, goblins, and even the king, who had arrived in a surprisingly well-maintained carriage, drawn by 6 slightly bewildered unicorns. His speech, a masterclass in medieval marketing, promised deals so spectacular they'll make even the most miserly dragon open his hoard. The convention itself was a chaotic mix of medieval culture and surprisingly modern consumerism. Knights haggled over the price of enchanted swords, negotiating with an air of ferocious seriousness, only to burst into laughter over a pun on steel, while peasants compared notes on the best brands of self-heating stew pots, the debate raging on for hours, fueled by copious quantities of ale. Goblins, surprisingly well-versed in the intricacies of online transactions, could be seen flitting between stalls, expertly exploiting loopholes in the surprisingly complex terms and conditions. One particularly memorable display featured a jousting tournament with prizes awarded to participants who successfully defended their shopping carts from marauding geese. Sir Reginald, nursing his injuries from his previous encounter, opted to act as commentator. The geese, it turned out, had formed their own Goosamajig convention nearby, drawing a surprising number of attendees, mostly farmers hoping to improve their goose herding techniques. A highlight of the convention was a demonstration of the new enchanted delivery system, a marvel of medieval engineering that combined carrier pigeons with a complex series of pulleys, ropes, and catapults. It worked, sometimes. A demonstration featuring a live order resulted in one delivery pigeon getting tangled in a banner, another colliding with a rather grumpy dragon who hadn't appreciated the sudden disruption to his nap, and a third delivering the package to the wrong customer, causing a minor diplomatic incident between a grumpy dwarf and a bewildered jester. The demonstration ended abruptly when the entire system collapsed in a shower of feathers and splintered wood, leaving Bartholomew to sheepishly explain it was still in beta testing. The king, meanwhile, had taken a particular shine to the self-cleaning chainmail. He'd spent a considerable amount of time trying on various sizes, occasionally pausing to engage in lengthy discussions with the stall owner about the merits of different types of enchanted thread. His attempts to haggle, however, were largely unsuccessful. The stall owner, a surprisingly strong woman named Brunhilde, refused to budge on the price. The king eventually relented, though the exchange was not without a royal amount of frustrated muttering. The goblin community, as it turned out, proved to be a major player in the online shopping scene. A delegation of particularly shrewd goblin merchants had set up their own stall, specializing in slightly used enchanted items, that is, items that were only slightly cursed, or perhaps just had the tendency to occasionally burst into spontaneous flames. Despite the inherent risks, the goblin's stall was one of the busiest at the convention. One goblin, a particularly mischievous fellow with a penchant for elaborate schemes, managed to convince several knights to purchase a batch of super-strength enchanted potions. These turned out to be nothing more than brightly colored root beer, but the knights were convinced of their heroic properties and spent much of the convention attempting to drink their way to becoming legendary champions. They weren't quite successful, but they did manage to achieve a remarkable level of inebriation, leading to several amusing sing-alongs that were only slightly interrupted by the occasional accidental sword fight. The convention culminated in a massive raffle. The grand prize? A lifetime supply of self-stirring cauldrons, enough enchanted thimbles to start your own needlepoint business, and a guaranteed shipment of geese, though Bartholomew wisely included a clause stating that the geese were not to be returned. The winner? Sir Reginald. The irony was, of course, entirely lost on him. The great medieval online shopping convention, despite its occasional calamities and near disasters, proved to be a resounding success. Bartholomew made a fortune. The village gained a newfound appreciation for the bizarre complexities of online shopping, and Cuthbert, watching from afar, decided that brewing potions and collecting toadstools was, after all, a much less stressful way to earn a living. The memory of the convention would linger, a testament to the surprisingly successful merging of medieval tradition and the unexpected chaos of the digital age. And somewhere, a flock of geese honked in agreement. Chapter 3: The Dragon Skin Jacket Debacle. The celebratory atmosphere of the medieval online shopping convention had barely begun to dissipate when the first whispers of the dragon skin jacket debacle began to circulate. It started subtly, a murmur among disgruntled knights complaining of unusually scaly jackets. Initial reports were dismissed as mere exaggerations, a bit of poetic license in the product descriptions perhaps. But as more complaints poured in, a pattern emerged. The advertised dragon skin jackets, shimmering and promising unparalleled protection, were, in reality, nothing more than expertly tanned lizard hides. And not just any lizards, mind you. These were lizards from a scale so vast, so extensive, that it suggested a conspiracy of epic proportions. Bartholomew, still basking in the glow of his convention's success, found himself facing a crisis of a far more serious nature than a rogue delivery pigeon or a collapsing catapult. His once pristine reputation, built on self-stirring cauldrons and magically self-cleaning chainmail, was now teetering precariously on the edge of a scaly precipice. He knew he needed to unravel the truth behind these deceptively convincing lizard hides before his empire crumbled. His investigations began with a disgruntled Sir Reginald, whose dragon skin jacket had unexpectedly shed its scales during a particularly enthusiastic game of goose jousting, leaving him looking less like a valiant knight and more like a rather unfortunate reptile. Reginald, never one to shy away from adventure or a good complaint, readily agreed to assist Bartholomew in his quest to expose the fraud. Their first lead came from a rather shifty-eyed merchant named Fitzwilliam, whose stall at the convention had mysteriously disappeared overnight. Fitzwilliam, it turned out, had been the primary supplier of the fraudulent jackets. Tracking him down proved to be an adventure in itself. It involved a thrilling chase through cobblestone streets. Sir Reginald's horse, still slightly traumatized by the earlier goose encounter, proved surprisingly helpful at distracting Fitzwilliam's guard dog, a particularly grumpy badger named Bartholomew II, and a daring infiltration of a dimly lit tavern where Fitzwilliam was attempting to blend in with a group of suspiciously jovial goblins. During the interrogation, which mostly involved a lot of loud accusations and the subtle threat of goose-related violence, Fitzwilliam confessed, spilling the secrets of the lizard hide conspiracy like spilled ale. The source, he revealed, wasn't some small-time operation. It was a sprawling lizard farm, hidden deep within a remote valley, operated by a clandestine organization known as the Scaly Syndicate. This syndicate, Fitzwilliam claimed, involved not only unscrupulous merchants, but also corrupt tax collectors who were turning a blind eye to the illegal lizard trade in exchange for a hefty share of the profits. Armed with this information, Bartholomew and Sir Reginald embarked on a perilous journey to the hidden lizard farm. The journey itself was a series of comedic mishaps. They got hopelessly lost, relying on a map drawn by Cuthbert, which unsurprisingly was more abstract art than practical guidance, encountered a family of particularly aggressive badgers defending their territory with alarmingly sharp claws, and had a near miss with a runaway ox cart driven by a drunken farmer singing off-key ballads about enchanted thimbles. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they arrived at the lizard farm, a sprawling complex hidden amid rolling hills, its air thick with the peculiar aroma of reptile scales and something suspiciously like overcooked cabbage. The farm itself was a sight to behold. Thousands of lizards, ranging in size from tiny geckos to monstrous behemoths, were crammed into cages, their scales shimmering under the midday sun. Workers, dressed in ill-fitting protective gear, scurried about tending to the reptiles, their movements oddly synchronized like a bizarre reptilian ballet. Their undercover operation involved disguises, a lot of awkward attempts at reptilian mimicry, and surprisingly convincing hissing. They infiltrated the farm, discovering a massive operation churning out dragon skin jackets at an alarming rate. The sheer scale of the deception was staggering. The lizards, Fitzwilliam had revealed, were being specifically bred for their scales, fed a diet of enchanted carrots and goose feathers, a detail that sent a shiver down Sir Reginald's spine. The entire operation was meticulously planned, flawlessly executed, until Bartholomew and Sir Reginald arrived, of course. Their presence didn't go unnoticed for long. A chase ensued, a chaotic scramble through lizard enclosures, with Bartholomew and Sir Reginald narrowly escaping snapping jaws and surprisingly well-aimed lizard droppings. The final confrontation involved a showdown with the head of the Scaly Syndicate, a surprisingly portly man named Grobnar, who wielded a whip made from braided lizard tails and spoke with an alarmingly high-pitched voice. The battle was less a fight and more a slapstick comedy routine, culminating in Grobnar tripping over a pile of discarded lizard skins and landing headfirst in a vat of enchanted carrot puree. Meanwhile, the corrupt tax collectors, alerted to the raid, arrived on the scene. Their attempts at intimidation involved a lot of pompous posturing and threats of exorbitant fines. But Bartholomew, armed with photographic evidence of the lizard farm's illegal operations and the tax collectors' shady dealings, quickly turned the tables. He threatened to expose their corruption to the king, a move that caused the tax collectors to retreat hastily, muttering about the importance of adhering to strict accounting practices. The aftermath saw the lizard farm shut down, the fraudulent merchants arrested, though Fitzwilliam received a surprisingly lenient sentence due to his timely confession, and the corrupt tax collectors facing their very own reckoning. Sir Reginald received a lifetime supply of genuinely dragon skin-lined socks, a compromise considering the geese jousting incident, and Bartholomew's reputation, after a temporary dip into the murky depths of reptile-related scandals, was restored to its former glory. The dragon skin jacket debacle had not only revealed a vast and intricate conspiracy, but also demonstrated the unexpected challenges of navigating even the most seemingly simple online transactions, especially when dragons are involved, or in this case, their lizard-like counterparts. The story, spread far and wide, became a cautionary tale about the importance of verifying online reviews, double-checking product descriptions, and perhaps, most importantly, avoiding any purchases that promise suspiciously good deals on dragon-related products. After all, sometimes a lizard is just a lizard, and that's perfectly acceptable, unless, of course, it's being passed off as a dragon. Then you have a problem of epic and scaly proportions. The tale of the dragon skin jackets served as a stark reminder that in the world of medieval online shopping, even the most mundane transactions held the potential for unexpected adventures, humorous mishaps, and the occasional deeply scaly conspiracy. The legacy of the dragon skin jackets would continue to echo through the annals of medieval online shopping history, a testament to the enduring power of both deception and hilarious incompetence. The world was, undeniably, a funnier place thanks to the sheer absurdity of the situation. And somewhere, a very large lizard sighed contentedly, dreaming of enchanted carrots. The grand hall of the royal palace shimmered under the weight of 1,000 candles. The air thrummed with the hushed anticipation of the annual royal falconry feast, an event of such importance that even the most seasoned court jester felt a tremor of nervousness. King Theodore, resplendent in his new dragon skin jacket, surveyed his assembled court with a regal air. He'd purchased the garment online, of course, swayed by a particularly persuasive advertisement promising unparalleled protection and a dazzling sheen that would make even the most discerning dragon envious. Little did he know, the dragon skin was nothing more than meticulously tanned lizard hide, a fact that would soon become painfully and hilariously apparent. The feast began with the usual fanfare. Trumpets blared, minstrels strummed, and an endless supply of roasted boar circulated amongst the guests. King Theodore, feeling particularly dashing in his new jacket, engaged in a lively discussion with the ambassador from the land of Glora, a notoriously picky individual known for his impeccable taste, and even more impeccable disdain for anything remotely subpar. As he gestured enthusiastically, emphasizing a point about the strategic importance of gooseberry cultivation, a single, then several scales detached from his jacket, fluttering down like oversized, iridescent confetti. The ambassador, mid-sip of his mead, nearly choked. His carefully cultivated composure cracked, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. The king, oblivious, continued his passionate discourse, entirely unaware that his regal attire was slowly but surely shedding its outer layer, transforming him from a majestic monarch into a walking, talking, slightly scaly reptile. A low murmur rippled through the assembled courtiers. Whispers of lizard, scales, and catastrophe danced amongst the candlelight. The situation escalated dramatically when a particularly boisterous knight, Sir Reginald, still recovering from his goose jousting incident, attempted a friendly pat on the king's back. The result was a cascade of lizard scales, which showered the knight and the surrounding courtiers in a shimmering, scaly rain. Sir Reginald, ever the gallant, managed to maintain his composure with surprising grace, but the sudden flurry of scales caused a ripple effect, sending a wave of nervous giggles through the hall. The king, finally noticing the disconcerting transformation of his jacket, attempted to discreetly brush the loose scales from his shoulders. This, however, proved to be a monumental error. The fabric, already weakened by the loss of so many scales, began to unravel, revealing glimpses of the underlying lizard hide. With a loud rip, a significant portion of the jacket tore away, exposing the king's rather ornate, but decidedly non-dragon skin, under tunic. The scene was utterly chaotic. Amidst the stunned silence, a rogue goose, somehow having escaped its pen and wandered into the banquet hall, took advantage of the distraction. It honked loudly, flapping its wings directly in the king's face and sending another shower of scales, this time from the remaining fragment of the jacket, flying through the air. The bird, perhaps sensing the comical nature of the situation, waddled toward the now exposed king, pecking playfully at the edge of his tunic. The king, in an unprecedented display of royal composure, or perhaps sheer shock, remained remarkably calm. He calmly addressed the court, his voice betraying only the slightest hint of a tremor. "My loyal subjects," he announced, gesturing with a hand that had somehow managed to retain a surprising amount of dignity amidst the chaos. "It seems my new jacket, while advertised as dragon skin, possesses a certain unique quality." He paused, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "One might say it is shedding its pretentiousness," he said, a chuckle escaping his lips. Perhaps a fitting metaphor for some of the grandiose claims made in the digital marketplace. His remark sparked a wave of relieved laughter. The initial shock gave way to an uproar of merriment. The ambassador from the land of Glora, his initial horror replaced by a grudging respect for the king's ability to turn a complete wardrobe malfunction into a public relations triumph, discreetly passed a note to his assistant. The note simply read, "Order more gooseberries." The rest of the feast proceeded with a remarkable degree of hilarity. The courtiers, emboldened by the king's good humor, shared stories of their own online shopping misadventures. A tale of enchanted thimbles that refused to fit any of the queen's fingers. A saga involving a self-stirring cauldron that produced only lukewarm gruel, and a particularly harrowing account of a delivery pigeon that seemed to have a vendetta against the royal stable, all emerged from the sudden burst of shared experience. The incident, however, did not go unnoticed. News of the king's lizard skin jacket debacle, as it became known, spread like wildfire. Cartoons depicting the king and the mischievous goose appeared throughout the kingdom. Ballads were sung in taverns, chronicling the royal wardrobe malfunction and its unexpectedly positive outcome. King Theodore, far from being mortified, used the incident to his advantage. He decreed a royal day of laughter, a public holiday dedicated to celebrating the absurdity of life and the occasional, truly unexpected online shopping fiasco. The lizard skin jacket became a symbol of resilience, humor, and the importance of a good sense of humor, even in the face of sartorial disaster. And somewhere, in a dimly lit tavern, Fitzwilliam raised a glass of ale to the king's unexpected resilience and the ongoing reign of comedic chaos brought to life by medieval online shopping. The ripples of this event extended far beyond the confines of the royal court, forever altering the landscape of medieval fashion and leaving behind a legacy of laughter that echoed through the ages. The king, ever the pragmatist, commissioned new jackets, this time from a reputable and thoroughly vetted tailor, ensuring there would be no more unexpected scale shedding during important royal events. The age of online shopping in the medieval world had only just begun, and there was sure to be more comedic chaos on the horizon. The king, in his wisdom, decided to embrace the absurdity, knowing that life, much like online shopping, was often unpredictable, wonderfully unexpected, and utterly hilarious. The aftermath of the king's lizard skin jacket debacle had barely settled when a new sensation swept across the kingdom. Agnes and her surprisingly successful thimble-powered fashion empire. Agnes, a humble seamstress previously known only for her perpetually mismatched socks and her uncanny ability to sew a button back on a shirt blindfolded, had stumbled upon a peculiar truth. Her enchanted thimbles weren't just for mending, they were for magic-infused fashion. It began, as most unlikely success stories do, with an accident. While attempting to repair a particularly stubborn tear in the royal jester's codpiece, an incident involving a rogue catapult and an unfortunate flock of geese, Agnes had inadvertently imbued the fabric with a self-cleaning enchantment. The jester, initially horrified by the shimmering, slightly luminous patch, quickly discovered that it never stained, never wrinkled, and most miraculously, never smelled of ale and roasted boar, a persistent problem that had plagued his profession for centuries. Word spread like wildfire. Suddenly, Agnes found herself besieged with orders. Knights desired trousers that mended themselves after a particularly enthusiastic joust. Ladies craved gowns that always remained perfectly pressed, and even the queen expressed interest in a cloak that could magically repel rain, a particularly desirable feature during the notoriously unpredictable medieval weather. Agnes, initially bewildered by her sudden fame, quickly adapted. Her small workshop transformed into a bustling atelier, buzzing with the activity of apprentice seamstresses, enchanted thimbles clicking and whirring, and bolts of fabric mysteriously changing color and texture before their very eyes. The air hummed with a low, almost imperceptible magical thrum, a testament to the sheer volume of thimble-powered enchantments being woven into the fabric of the kingdom. Her creations were unique, even bizarre. One particularly popular item was the self-stirring apron, adored by cooks for its ability to stir pots and pans autonomously, leaving them free to gossip with their fellow kitchen staff. Then there was the ever-warm shawl, a seemingly simple garment that radiated gentle warmth, perfect for banishing the chill of a medieval winter. Even more strangely successful were the self-folding laundry bags, which inexplicably folded themselves after each washing, leaving the laundry maid free from the tedious and often frustrating chore. The marketplace, usually a cacophony of shouting merchants and bleating animals, now boasted a new spectacle: Agnes's enchanted garments. Her stall, initially a modest affair tucked away in a quiet corner, had expanded to occupy a significant portion of the square. Silk banners emblazoned with her somewhat hastily drawn logo, a thimble perched atop a needle, fluttered in the breeze. Models, many of whom were former disgruntled customers with tales of ill-fitting shoes and disappointing cloaks, now proudly showcased Agnes's latest creations. The contrast between her humble beginnings and her sudden success was staggering. Agnes, still clad in her usual mismatched attire, oversaw her empire with an air of bemused bewilderment. She seemed completely unfazed by the throngs of nobles, knights, and even royalty clamoring for her magical creations. She would calmly explain the properties of each garment, her voice soft but firm, her hands deftly demonstrating the self-mending capabilities of a particularly resilient pair of breeches. However, running a magical fashion empire in medieval times presented unique challenges. One of the most significant was the issue of quality control. While the thimbles worked their magic reliably, the results were occasionally unexpected. There was the incident of the ever-shrinking tunic, which inexplicably decreased in size each time it was worn, eventually becoming suitable only for a particularly small mouse. Then there was the infamous self-dancing skirt, which possessed a disconcerting tendency to perform an impromptu jig at the most inopportune moments, much to the amusement and occasional chagrin of its wearer. The logistical challenges were equally daunting. The delivery system relied primarily on slightly unreliable pigeons, often prone to getting distracted by shiny objects and the occasional tasty crumb. One particularly memorable delivery involved a pair of enchanted boots that were mistaken for a particularly large and unusual bird, resulting in a lengthy search party and a very disgruntled falconer. Then there were the inevitable copycats, a series of suspiciously similar and vastly inferior garments began appearing in the marketplace, often at slightly lower prices. Agnes, however, remained unperturbed. The genuine magic of her thimbles, she knew, was simply too much for any impostor to replicate perfectly, though they certainly gave her a hearty laugh. The low-quality imitations usually fell apart in spectacularly unmagical fashion. Despite the challenges, Agnes's empire flourished. Her fashion line became synonymous with quality, innovation, and a touch of whimsical magic. She single-handedly transformed the landscape of medieval fashion, replacing the drab, often impractical garments of the past with functional, innovative, and often hilariously magical alternatives. And all it took was a few enchanted thimbles and an unlikely accident involving a royal jester and a catapult. The king, still sporting his now much mended non-dragon skin jacket, became a loyal patron. He often stopped by Agnes's stall, not only to purchase new garments, but also to exchange witty banter and hear the latest gossip from the bustling marketplace. He even suggested the creation of a line of self-cleaning royal robes, a project that promised to be both enormously lucrative and hilariously chaotic. Agnes's story spread throughout the kingdom, a delightful saga of accidental magic, unlikely success, and the resilience of the human and occasionally enchanted thimble-powered spirit. It was a tale that perfectly captured the absurdity of medieval life, laced with a healthy dose of humor and a dash of unexpected magical flair. Her story became a legend, a reminder that even in the most mundane of circumstances, magic could, and often did, find a way to make things hilariously, wonderfully, unexpectedly more interesting. And her thimbles, well, they continued their enchanted work, transforming the drab fabrics of the medieval world into something truly magical, one stitch, one enchantment, one self-folding laundry bag at a time. The tale of Agnes and her thimble-powered fashion empire stood as a testament to the enduring power of a well-placed stitch, a bit of magic, and a whole lot of unexpected comedic genius. The legacy of Agnes continued to resonate through the centuries, a symbol of ingenuity, resilience, and the ever-present possibility of magic and laughter in the most unlikely of places. Bartholomew, a pigeon of discerning taste and surprisingly sharp intellect, had long harbored a simmering resentment towards the medieval online shopping industry. He'd witnessed firsthand the haphazard delivery system, the perilous rooftop journeys, the constant threat of hungry cats, and the utter lack of pigeon-friendly perches during lengthy delivery waits. He'd seen scrolls detailing orders for enchanted thimbles get swapped with scrolls detailing orders for particularly pungent cheeses, solely because a hawk had a penchant for shiny things. The indignity, the final straw, however, came in the form of a particularly soggy order of gingerbread men. Bartholomew, tasked with delivering the sweet treats to a notoriously grumpy blacksmith, had braved a torrential downpour, only to arrive to find the gingerbread men reduced to a soggy, inedible mess. The blacksmith, already in a foul mood because his enchanted bellows had decided to take an unscheduled vacation, had unleashed a torrent of verbal abuse upon Bartholomew, quite unfairly blaming the soggy state of the biscuits on the pigeon. That night, under the silvery glow of the moon, Bartholomew gathered a clandestine meeting of disgruntled pigeons on the highest rooftop in the city. He perched on the weather vane, his tiny feathered body radiating an unexpected aura of leadership. "My fellow avian comrades," he chirped, his voice surprisingly strong and clear, "we have suffered enough. We are the backbone of this medieval e-commerce empire, the unsung heroes who brave the elements, dodge the hawks, and endure the wrath of grumpy blacksmiths. Yet what is our reward? Soggy gingerbread men and a complete lack of decent pigeon-sized rest stops." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled pigeons. One particularly plump pigeon, known for his penchant for gossip and stolen crumbs, voiced the sentiment of many. "He's right. They never even provide us with seed. It's sunflower seeds, or nothing. What about pigeon-sized water fountains? We don't even get time off for nesting season." Bartholomew, sensing the mood shift, continued, "We demand better working conditions. We demand a comprehensive pigeon-friendly delivery network, complete with rest stops, strategically placed seed dispensers, and a network of emergency pigeon-sized elevators to avoid those perilous stairs." A wave of excited chirps and coos erupted from the assembled pigeons. The idea of pigeon-sized elevators was particularly appealing. The sheer absurdity of the demand only enhanced its charm. News of Bartholomew's pigeon post-revolution spread like wildfire through the city's rooftops and alleyways. Soon, pigeons from every corner of the kingdom were joining the cause. Their demands were surprisingly specific: higher wages, paid in premium seeds naturally, shorter delivery routes, and an end to the constant harassment from cats. Their methods were unique. Their first act of rebellion involved a coordinated strike. No pigeons, no deliveries. The kingdom ground to a halt. Online shopping orders piled up, causing a frantic scramble among the merchants. The king, used to instant gratification through the wonders of online shopping, became unexpectedly agitated. Bartholomew, however, didn't stop at a simple strike. His brilliance lay in his tactical genius, or perhaps in the sheer chaos his actions created. The pigeons launched a series of highly organized, albeit utterly bizarre, protests. They launched a mass-coordinated poop bombing of the royal stables, a very effective, if somewhat messy, demonstration of power. They staged a sit-in on the king's prized griffin, causing much annoyance and even more laughter among the court. Their most audacious act, however, involved the strategic hijacking of the royal pigeon post communications system, using sophisticated, for pigeons, techniques involving cleverly placed pecks and strategically dropped scrolls. Bartholomew managed to rewrite the king's orders to include a vast expansion of the pigeon-friendly infrastructure, including, and this is crucial, those elevators. The king, initially furious at the disruption, found himself amused by the audacity of the pigeon rebellion and the sheer absurdity of their demands. He realized that attempting to suppress such charmingly organized chaos was futile. Furthermore, the lack of online shopping deliveries was seriously impacting his ability to order more of those questionable self-mending trousers from Agnes's increasingly popular shop. The ensuing negotiations were legendary. Bartholomew, surprisingly skilled in the art of avian diplomacy, presented his demands with unwavering conviction and a startling amount of charm. He even managed to secure a lifetime supply of premium sunflower seeds for himself and his fellow revolutionaries. The result was a landmark agreement, enshrined in a signed and slightly pecked royal decree, the Pigeon Post Reform Act of 1247. The act included provisions for rest stops, seed dispensers, emergency elevators, and a comprehensive pigeon safety training program, a program that involved, amongst other things, a series of educational videos explaining how to distinguish between a friendly dog and a cat poised to ambush. The victory was celebrated with much flapping of wings, a sky-high feast of sunflower seeds, and a rare moment of peace and harmony between humans and pigeons. Bartholomew, once a lowly delivery pigeon, became a revered hero, a symbol of avian empowerment, and a living testament to the fact that even the smallest of creatures can inspire the most significant of changes, particularly if they're highly organized and strategically adept at poop bombing. The memory of Bartholomew's pigeon post revolution remained a beloved and slightly messy anecdote across the medieval kingdom, forever demonstrating that even the smallest creatures, when sufficiently motivated and perhaps slightly disgruntled, can overthrow the most established power structure, one strategically placed poop bomb at a time. The tales of Bartholomew and his feathered army were recounted for generations, a reminder that even in the most fantastical of medieval settings, workers' rights and a good supply of sunflower seeds are universally important. The king, even, still chuckled about the whole affair whenever he felt the need to escape the monotony of royal duties, a reminder that even the most powerful monarch could be brought down, even if only temporarily, by a well-organized army of slightly disgruntled pigeons. The aftermath of Bartholomew's pigeon post revolution had left the kingdom in a state of bewildered calm. The king, surprisingly fond of his new pigeon-friendly infrastructure, had even commissioned a series of stained glass windows depicting Bartholomew's heroic deeds, though Bartholomew himself remained unconvinced of their artistic merit. Life, however, continued its chaotic dance, especially in the realm of online shopping. It was during this period of relative tranquility that the infamous incident of the misdelivered scrolls occurred. The scrolls, intricately bound in dragon hide, or at least a convincingly close imitation thereof, thanks to Agnes's surprisingly successful lizard hide enterprise, contained powerful incantations destined for the wizened fingers of Archmage Eldrin, a man whose beard alone could rival a small forest in terms of volume and density. These scrolls were, naturally, entrusted to the most reliable delivery service the kingdom could offer, the newly reformed and highly efficient Pigeon Post. Unfortunately, A series of events orchestrated by a particularly mischievous squirrel with a penchant for shiny objects and a deep-seated hatred for pigeons, a rivalry as old as time itself, resulted in a disastrous misdelivery. The scrolls, instead of arriving at Eldrun's secluded tower, found themselves in the surprisingly capable claws of a particularly boisterous group of bards at the Crooked Tankard Tavern. The Crooked Tankard was, to put it mildly, a chaotic establishment. The air hung thick with the aroma of stale ale, unwashed bodies, and a distinct lack of personal hygiene. The bards, a motley crew of aspiring musicians and chroniclers of wildly inaccurate tavern tales, were known more for their boisterous songs and drunken brawls than their musical talent or historical accuracy. Their current project involved a particularly ambitious ballad about a heroic squirrel battling a horde of surprisingly well-organized weasels. The arrival of the dragon-hide-bound scrolls was initially met with confusion. One particularly rotund bard, Fitzwilliam, mistook them for a rare edition of the complete works of slightly inebriated troubadours, a tome he had been searching for fruitlessly for many moons. He unfurled the first scroll with a triumphant bellow, a sound that promptly silenced the tavern's usual cacophony. What followed was not the expected recounting of romantic exploits and drunken escapades, but a series of increasingly bizarre and unintended magical consequences. The first incantation, misinterpreted by Fitzwilliam as a recipe for a particularly potent ale, resulted in the spontaneous generation of a swarm of miniature singing gnomes who proceeded to serenade the patrons with an ear-splitting rendition of an ancient dwarven drinking song. Another bard, a wiry fellow named Barnaby, who harbored a secret desire to become a powerful wizard, despite a distinct lack of magical aptitude, attempted to decipher the second scroll. He mispronounced a key word, transforming the tavern's ale supply into a vibrant, bubbling concoction that glowed with an ominous green light. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The drinkers, upon consuming the magical brew, experienced a sudden, uncontrollable urge to perform interpretive dances involving oversized spoons and tankards. The chaos continued unabated. One scroll, intended to summon a protective shield, accidentally summoned a flock of particularly aggressive geese who proceeded to wreak havoc among the terrified patrons. Another, designed to banish evil spirits, instead summoned a squadron of miniature dragons who seemed to have a particular fondness for the tavern's surprisingly flammable roof. The bards, utterly overwhelmed by the unintentional consequences of their magical misinterpretations, attempted to make amends, their efforts only escalating the pandemonium. Their attempts at counterspells often resulted in equally bizarre and unforeseen side effects. One such attempt led to the tavern's furniture morphing into various woodland creatures, adding to the growing chaos. The Archmage Eldrun, realizing his scrolls had gone missing, was understandably agitated. His arrival at the Crooked Tankard, clad in his most intimidating robes and armed with his equally intimidating staff, only served to elevate the already heightened level of pandemonium. His attempts to regain control of the situation were hindered by the sheer number of dancing patrons, singing gnomes, and mischievous miniature dragons. In the end, It took the combined efforts of Bartholomew, who had been called in to handle the increasingly volatile situation with his newly acquired pigeon post delivery expertise, Eldrun's magical prowess, and a remarkably coordinated effort from the tavern's unexpectedly resourceful staff to restore order. The tavern was left in ruins, the scrolls were recovered, albeit somewhat singed, and the bards found themselves facing a rather significant tavern repair bill, not to mention the wrath of the Archmage. The incident of the misdelivered scrolls became a legendary tale, recounted in hushed whispers throughout the kingdom, a testament to the unpredictable nature of magic and the consistently unpredictable nature of medieval online shopping, and possibly the unexpectedly poor reading comprehension of even the most accomplished bards. The Crooked Tankard, after extensive renovations, reopened its doors, slightly less crooked, but no less chaotic, and Bartholomew, naturally, secured a lifetime supply of extra premium sunflower seeds for his exceptional crisis management skills. The king, meanwhile, ordered a new set of self-mending trousers, delivered this time with 0 incidents, thanks to the improved pigeon post and significantly fewer mischievous squirrels, to ease his stress. After all, even a king has limits to the magical pandemonium he can endure. Chapter 4: The Future of Medieval E-Commerce. The air crackled with anticipation, a palpable buzz that hummed through the assembled crowd. Not the usual hushed reverence one might expect for a royal proclamation or a knightly tournament, but a vibrant, almost electric energy, the kind usually reserved for the unveiling of a new miracle-working ointment or a particularly potent batch of mead. Today, however, the source of this excitement was far more mundane, yet arguably far more revolutionary. The grand opening of the medieval mall. This wasn't your typical ramshackle collection of market stalls. Oh no, this was a marvel of medieval engineering and surprisingly advanced, for the time, e-commerce technology. Imagine, if you will, a colossal structure of gleaming oak and polished stone, its soaring arches adorned with intricate carvings, depicting scenes of triumphant online shoppers receiving their purchases, mostly depictions of knights joyfully accepting their newly arrived chainmail, though one particularly curious carving showed a peasant ecstatically embracing a delivery pigeon bearing a rather suspiciously large cheese wheel. Inside, the latest innovations in digital displays, powered by a complex system of enchanted crystals and cleverly camouflaged hamsters on spinning wheels, showcased an array of goods from every corner of the kingdom and beyond. The opening ceremony began naturally with a procession of dignitaries. King Theodore the Tolerant, mostly tolerant, except when it came to overdue taxes. His queen and a gaggle of squabbling nobles paraded through the massive oak doors. Their finery, glittering under the midday sun, provided a stark contrast to the more practical attire of the merchants and artisans who lined the walkways, their faces a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The king, after a somewhat rambling speech focusing mainly on the benefits of increased tax revenue, a topic he was particularly passionate about, ceremoniously pressed a large, ruby-encrusted button supposed to activate the mall's impressive digital signage. Nothing happened. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A nervous cough from the chief engineer, A slightly balding man named Cuthbert, who was visibly sweating under the weight of the king's expectant gaze, was the only response. After a period of awkward silence, the crowd was treated to a display of medieval troubleshooting at its finest. Cuthbert, wielding a rather impressive hammer, proceeded to whack various parts of the control panel. The rhythmic clang of metal on enchanted crystal resonated throughout the mall, while the hamsters on their wheels appeared to be engaged in some sort of frantic and possibly caffeinated wheel-spinning race. The king, meanwhile, resorted to muttering imprecations under his breath, a mixture of Old English curses and modern-day expressions of frustration that only further highlighted the absurdity of the situation. Eventually, with a final resounding thump, the digital displays sputtered to life, revealing a gloriously pixelated image of a particularly plump goose, not exactly the intended promotional video of the mall's advanced technological capabilities, but it did get a laugh from the assembled dignitaries. The initial technical hiccups notwithstanding, the opening was a spectacular success. The mall's unique blend of traditional craftsmanship and modern technology proved to be an irresistible draw for the populace. Shoppers, from the humblest peasant to the most esteemed noble, flocked to the various stalls, marveling at the vast array of goods on offer. The blacksmith's wife, Agnes, delightedly ordered a silk gown. No more lizard hide for her, she declared, while Sir Reginald, still recovering from the goose incident, he'd accidentally ordered 1 Dachshund instead of 1, cautiously browsed the latest in warhorse armor, this time double-checking the product description 10 times over. However, the e-commerce revolution didn't come without its challenges. The pigeon post, despite Bartholomew's best efforts, still struggled to keep up with the sheer volume of deliveries. A new problem emerged. The delivery pigeons, overwhelmed by the unprecedented demand, developed a collective tendency to deliver parcels to completely random locations, often causing a certain degree of confusion and, on occasion, mild pandemonium. A series of unfortunate incidents involving misplaced enchanted swords, accidentally delivered dragon eggs, and one particularly indignant badger demonstrated the necessity for better postal infrastructure. The mall's grand opening also saw the rise of a new form of medieval e-commerce fraud, the Enchanted Bargains scam, a shadowy organization promising rare magical items at unbelievably low prices, was quickly gaining popularity, mostly due to their clever use of misspellings and deliberately vague product descriptions. One unsuspecting customer had ordered what was promised to be a genuine dragon-scale shield, only to receive a rather convincing imitation crafted from intricately polished fish scales, painted a rather dull shade of green. Nevertheless, the medieval mall, despite its initial technical difficulties and the ongoing struggles with fraudsters and delivery pigeons, remained a testament to the indomitable spirit of the human race, its capacity for innovation even in the face of adversity, and its unwavering desire to buy things online, even if it means dealing with singing gnomes and occasionally misdirected parcels. And somewhere, in a faraway land, a squirrel smiled, well-fed and content, thanks to his continued campaign to foil the pigeon post. The saga of medieval e-commerce was far from over. The era of online shopping had arrived in the Middle Ages, and it was proving to be as chaotic, unpredictable, and hilarious as one might expect. The future of commerce, it seemed, was uncertain, but it was undoubtedly entertaining. The king, meanwhile, ordered another pair of self-mending trousers, this time with reinforced stitching and extra dragon hide patches, just in case. One could never be too prepared for the unpredictable world of medieval online shopping. The next day brought a new wave of challenges. The enchanted crystal powering the mall's digital signage decided to temporarily develop a taste for opera, resulting in a bizarre musical interlude during peak shopping hours. Shoppers, instead of browsing the latest in weaponry and fine silks, were forced to endure a rendition of a particularly lengthy and mournful dwarven opera, complete with surprisingly dramatic sound effects generated by the hamsters, now inexplicably mimicking the sounds of a full orchestra. Then there was the incident involving the enchanted carpet sale. The promotional banner read, "Fly to your heart's content. Get 20% off." Unfortunately, the 20% off part was a rather literal interpretation of a discount. The carpets, upon purchase, only allowed for 20% of the wearer to be airborne, leading to a series of rather comical, half-floating shoppers attempting to navigate the mall's bustling corridors. The day ended with the discovery of a rogue goblin attempting to return a cursed helmet, claiming it didn't fit. The helmet, it turned out, wasn't just cursed, it was also sentient and had a penchant for dramatic pronouncements about the injustices of the digital marketplace. The helmet's return was ultimately refused, owing to its rather aggressive and surprisingly articulate complaint regarding the mall's return policy. This incident, though initially alarming, added to the mall's unique and slightly chaotic atmosphere, and so the medieval mall continued to operate, its daily business a chaotic blend of technological marvels, ancient traditions, mischievous goblins, and a seemingly endless supply of misdelivered packages. It was a testament to the enduring human spirit, our capacity for innovation, and our unwavering devotion to online shopping. Even in the Middle Ages, it appeared, online shopping was a source of both endless amusement and profound frustration. And perhaps that's why it was so completely, wonderfully medieval. Sir Reginald, chin resting on his hand, stared intently at the glowing screen of his newly acquired and surprisingly sturdy oak and iron laptop. The flickering candlelight reflected in the polished surface, casting dancing shadows on his already somewhat exasperated expression. The goose incident, as it was now affectionately and somewhat ironically referred to in the castle, had been a turning point. It wasn't just the sheer number of geese, 1,000, mind you, 1,000, or the resulting chaos in the castle courtyard, though those were significant contributors to his current state of mild existential dread. No, it was the realization that online shopping, while offering unprecedented convenience, for a medieval knight at least, was also a minefield of potential disaster, a digital swamp of misplaced orders and wildly inaccurate product descriptions. He needed a new strategy, a better approach, and he decided that strategy would be on online shopping therapy. His plan was simple, or so he thought. He'd meticulously curate a list of items designed to enhance his mental well-being and improve his overall knightly prowess. First on the list, a calming herbal tea blend, Nightly Tranquility, the website promised, adding the reassuring disclaimer, may contain traces of dragon's breath. He added a self-help book, Conquering Your Inner Dragon, a knight's guide to emotional mastery, a plush unicorn for stress relief, an unexpected addition even to him, and perhaps, a bit too ambitiously, a set of advanced chivalry training videos promising to unlock the secrets of legendary knights. The ordering process was surprisingly straightforward, a marked improvement from his previous goose-related mishap. He carefully double-checked every detail, triple-checked, even quadruple-checked, muttering incantations under his breath for good measure. He'd learned his lesson, or at least he thought he had. The delivery, as one might expect, was anything but straightforward. The initial shipment, according to the tracking pigeon, a particularly grumpy-looking fellow named Bartholomew Jr., was delayed due to an unforeseen encounter with a flock of particularly aggressive swallows who had a vested interest in the nightly tranquility tea blend. They appeared, Bartholomew claimed, to have developed a rather severe caffeine addiction, presumably from consuming some of the potent dragon's breath mentioned in the product description. The next delay was caused by a rogue band of mischievous goblins who, it seems, had a fondness for plush unicorns. Bartholomew Jr. had arrived back to the castle with only a single, slightly squished unicorn ear and a tale of daring escapes, close calls, and a surprising amount of goblin-crafted artisanal cheese. Finally, after a week of delays and a series of increasingly frantic updates from Bartholomew Jr., delivered mostly via increasingly frantic squawks and wing flapping, the package arrived. Except it wasn't entirely as ordered. The herbal tea blend had arrived, although it was less nightly tranquility and more nightly insomnia, causing Sir Reginald to spend most of the night wrestling a particularly vivid dream involving a three-headed goose reciting Shakespeare. The self-help book had also arrived, but it was titled Conquering Your Inner Goblin, A Peasant's Guide to Emotional Mastery, a title that did little to assuage Sir Reginald's anxiety. The plush unicorn, however, was indeed present, though it seemed to have developed a startling resemblance to one of his castle guard dogs, a hulking beast named Brutus. The advanced chivalry training videos, it turned out, were not videos at all, but a stack of rather dusty scrolls depicting a series of rather unimpressive combat techniques featuring mostly very clumsy-looking knights falling over frequently. Undeterred, or perhaps driven by a masochistic streak, Sir Reginald continued his online therapy sessions. He ordered a medieval stress ball, a rather heavy iron orb, a set of calming incense, which smelled suspiciously like burnt toast, and a subscription box promising to deliver a monthly supply of magical surprises. The stress ball ended up cracking his laptop screen, apparently not as sturdy as advertised. The incense set off the castle fire alarm, a rather ancient contraption powered by a cranky dwarf, and the magical surprises turned out to be a collection of mildly cursed socks and a miniature, albeit rather noisy, dragon. The dragon, named Sparky, a rather ironic name, considering his tendency to set things on fire, proved to be the most unexpected benefit of his therapeutic online shopping spree. Despite the initial chaos, Sparky became something of a castle mascot, albeit a rather fiery one. The cursed socks, however, remained a mystery, disappearing and reappearing in the most unexpected places, their cursed nature manifesting in things like spontaneously appearing holes and inexplicable smells of old cheese. Sir Reginald, amidst the chaos of misdelivered packages, sentient socks, and miniature dragons, realized something profound. Online shopping therapy, at least in the Middle Ages, wasn't about stress reduction. It was about embracing the absurdity of life, even the digital variety. He may not have found inner peace, but he certainly had a new appreciation for the chaotic energy of medieval e-commerce. And besides, Sparky had a surprisingly soothing effect, his tiny snores punctuating the otherwise hectic rhythms of castle life. One particularly notable incident involved Sir Reginald accidentally ordering a year's supply of goose food, a misclick that resulted in a massive influx of extremely plump and quite indignant geese arriving in the courtyard. This, however, was soon overshadowed by the appearance of a traveling salesman attempting to sell Sir Reginald an enchanted goose-sized suit of armor, an item whose utility Sir Reginald found debatable, to say the least. The situation was further complicated by the appearance of Agnes, the blacksmith's wife, who had decided to join in on Sir Reginald's somewhat chaotic online shopping spree. She had accidentally ordered 100 enchanted thimbles, which then promptly started arguing with each other about their respective magical properties, mostly involving the production of miniature pastries and the ability to predict the outcome of dice rolls. The chaos continued, fueled by a steady stream of misdelivered packages, increasingly erratic pigeons, and the occasional appearance of a rogue goblin attempting to return a particularly smelly enchanted sock. Yet, in the midst of it all, there was a strange sense of camaraderie, a shared experience of the unique joys and frustrations of online shopping in the Middle Ages. Sir Reginald, bruised, bewildered, but ultimately unbowed, accepted that his online shopping therapy was a work in progress, a constantly evolving experiment in chaotic digital self-discovery. The geese, however, remained a permanent fixture of his life, at least until he could figure out how to safely return that additional year's supply of food without adding to the already existing feathered chaos. The future of medieval e-commerce, as Sir Reginald found, was a roller coaster, a very, very geese-filled roller coaster, and somehow he wouldn't have it any other way. The air in the grand ballroom crackled with anticipation, a mixture of excitement and nervous energy hanging heavy in the air, like the scent of overripe plums. Tapestries depicting heroic, yet strangely inaccurate, depictions of past battles adorned the walls, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the hushed expectancy of the crowd. Tonight was the night of Agnes's magical fashion show, an event that promised to redefine medieval haute couture, or at least cause a significant amount of bewildered amusement. Agnes, the blacksmith's wife, stood backstage, surrounded by a whirlwind of silks, satins, and shimmering enchanted threads. Her usually practical attire had been replaced by a shimmering gown of midnight blue, embroidered with constellations that subtly shifted and twinkled. A nervous tremor ran through her as she adjusted the bejeweled collar, a creation that, according to its rather verbose product description, offered protection from minor curses and an increased chance of winning at dice. She'd yet to test the latter claim, but the curse protection had come in handy when one of the enchanted thimbles from her previous online shopping spree, had decided to inexplicably shrink her trousers. The first model, a rather nervous young page boy named Pip, emerged onto the makeshift runway, a hastily constructed path of polished flagstones. He wore a tunic crafted from self-cleaning linen, a garment Agnes had described, with perhaps a little overzealous marketing, as a revolutionary garment that never needs washing ever. The demonstration of this feature, however, resulted in a small plume of soapy bubbles erupting from the tunic's seams as Pip attempted a dramatic twirl, leaving him looking both unimpressed and slightly damp. Next came Lady Beatrice, a renowned beauty who usually favored severe, almost Spartan attire. Tonight, however, she was adorned in a gown woven from moonlight and spider silk. The fabric shifted and flowed with every movement, mimicking the silvery shimmer of a moonlit lake. This, of course, caused a minor distraction when the moonlight effect accidentally turned the castle's chandelier into a miniature sun, causing a brief but intense wave of heat that made several onlookers fan themselves dramatically. Each garment had its unique quirks. One dress, designed for a huntress, possessed pockets that inexplicably produced an endless supply of perfectly roasted game birds, leading to an impromptu feast among the front row guests and a significant amount of startled squawking from the unexpectedly plump pheasants. Another, a delicate gown of spun gold, had a peculiar habit of growing flowers upon the wearer's head and neck, though the blooms promptly wilted when touched, resulting in a fragrant, if fleeting, floral display. A particularly memorable piece was a cloak woven from enchanted raven feathers. The cloak boasted protection from ill fortune and the ability to speak with ravens, a claim which prompted a rather heated argument between the cloak and a particularly grumpy-looking raven perched atop the ballroom's chandelier. The ensuing conversation, involving a high-pitched squawking and the cloak's rather condescending remarks, became the highlight of the show. There were mishaps, of course. One particularly ambitious creation, a dress crafted from solidified starlight, proved rather difficult to keep on the model, who found herself shedding starlight as she walked, creating a rather dazzling but confusing effect, leaving a shimmering trail of stardust across the floor. Another attempt at a self-tying corset resulted in the model being momentarily trapped in a rather snug embrace of woven silk, leading to much giggling and gentle disentangling. And one particularly temperamental skirt, woven from the threads of a particularly mischievous sprite, decided to engage in a solo dance routine, causing the model to follow its spontaneous movements to ensure the skirt remained attached to her waist. But the audience was captivated. They were witnessing not just a fashion show, but a display of magical artistry, a chaotic blend of high fashion and accidental sorcery. The nobles laughed, gasped, and applauded, their initial skepticism quickly dissolving into delighted amazement. The juxtaposition of high fashion and uncontrolled magical events was a bizarre and wildly entertaining form of entertainment, a spectacle that transcended the usual expectations of a courtly gathering. The climax arrived with Agnes's own creation, a gown of woven rainbows, each color a subtly different shade of magic. It shifted and changed with the wearer's mood, becoming an ever-changing kaleidoscope of color. As Agnes gracefully moved in the gown, the ballroom was filled with a spectrum of light, creating a magical, almost otherworldly atmosphere. The rainbow effect, however, inadvertently caused the castle's stained glass windows to momentarily display scenes from a particularly bizarre and slightly disturbing interpretation of the knight's legendary adventures. The resulting confused murmurs and whispered commentary were almost as captivating as Agnes's dress. The show ended in a flurry of applause, cheers, and a scattering of enchanted sequins that, to Agnes's mild horror, began to form themselves into tiny, glittering, dancing fairies that added yet another level to the already surreal situation. Sir Reginald, despite his reservations about the spontaneous combustion possibility mentioned in the product description of the rainbow dress, was left somewhat breathless, though the smell of burnt toast from his previous online shopping experiments momentarily interfered with the overall enchanting effect of the evening. Agnes, surrounded by a whirlwind of excited nobles and equally confused onlookers, smiled. The fashion show had been a success, a chaotic, hilarious triumph. The line between haute couture and accidental wizardry blurred completely, but amidst the chaos, Agnes had managed to achieve a rather impressive magical feat. Agnes's magical fashion show was a roaring success, marking the beginning of a new era of medieval fashion, one where the unpredictability of magic only added to the inherent charm and allure of her clothing. However, the success was not without its unique medieval challenges. The self-cleaning laundryless tunic, while a success in eliminating the need for washing, had a slight tendency to spontaneously combust if the wearer was in close proximity to open flames. The moonlit gown, while stunning in its ethereal beauty, occasionally summoned nocturnal creatures, leading to several minor but disconcerting incidents involving stray bats and overly curious owls. The situation was further complicated by the self-tying corset, which often tied itself around several unwitting onlookers, causing a chain reaction of surprised screams and frantic disentanglement. This was topped off with the ever-evolving nature of the rainbow gown, which changed colors based on the wearer's emotions. A sudden surge of stress or anger could transform the gown into a garish mix of alarming hues. The enchanted raven feather cloak, while possessing the advertised ability to speak with ravens, also tended to encourage lengthy and often deeply philosophical conversations that often led the wearer into lengthy discussions on topics such as the existential meaning of shiny objects and the relative merits of worm versus beetle larvae as snack food. The self-producing game birds in the huntress's dress proved somewhat problematic, as they often emerged mid-sentence during important meetings, prompting a series of interrupted debates and a high level of awkwardness among court officials. Nevertheless, despite the chaos and the occasional mishap, Agnes's fashion show became a legend, a tale whispered among the noble ladies and repeated with awe and laughter among the more adventurous court jesters. Agnes, however, continued to refine her magical designs, meticulously noting the sometimes unexpected effects, whilst developing her innovative line of magical clothing, always embracing the unique charm of unpredictable medieval magic infused into the realm of high fashion. This peculiar blend of unpredictability and elegance continued to define her unique style for years to come, ensuring her legendary status in the chronicles of medieval e-commerce and fashion. The The legend of Agnes and her magical fashions lived on, a testament to the unpredictable yet uniquely delightful world of online shopping in the Middle Ages. Bartholomew, the grizzled veteran of the medieval courier pigeon service, finally hung up his tiny satchel. His wings, once weary from carrying enchanted thimbles and self-cleaning tunics across the kingdom, now rested contentedly. He'd secured a surprisingly generous retirement package, a lifetime supply of sunflower seeds, the finest naturally hand-picked by a team of enchanted squirrels, a miniature, surprisingly comfortable dovecote built from reclaimed castle rubble, and a golden quill pen, which disappointingly did not write in actual gold ink, but a rather vibrant, if slightly unpredictable shade of shimmering purple. His new life was idyllic. Sunrises painted the rolling hills in hues of apricot and rose. The air hummed with the gentle buzz of bees, and the only sound louder than the chirping crickets was the rhythmic cooing of his retirement community, a gaggle of similarly aged pigeons enjoying their well-deserved rest. Bartholomew spent his days pecking at his seeds, composing philosophical poems about the existential dread of seed shells, a surprisingly popular topic within his pigeon community, and occasionally engaging in competitive staring contests with a particularly grumpy toad. Evenings were spent under the star-dusted sky, reminiscing about past deliveries, the time he'd accidentally dropped a consignment of explosive love potions onto a jousting tournament, or the day he'd been mistaken for a particularly plump raven by the enchanted cloak from Agnes's fashion show. His retirement was a testament to his shrewd negotiation skills and the growing unionization within the medieval courier service, a development that had astonished even the most seasoned of court officials. The notion of pigeons demanding better working conditions, including improved seed quality, shorter flight distances, and a mandatory midday nap, had been met with initial bewilderment, but the union's unwavering resolve, along with the unfortunate incident involving a rogue shipment of exploding gingerbread men that accidentally halted court proceedings, had quickly proven their bargaining power. One particularly serene afternoon, while composing an ode to the beauty of a particularly plump earthworm, Bartholomew's piece was shattered. A small, intricately woven basket, propelled by a surprisingly agile dragonfly, landed with a gentle thud on his dovecote's roof. The dragonfly, sporting a miniature satchel and a tiny official-looking cap, buzzed impatiently. Inside the basket was a single, rather ominous-looking package, wrapped in layers of dark, almost black velvet. Attached was a note, written in elegant, spidery script. For Bartholomew, the last delivery. Contents: 1-1. Slightly misunderstood kraken. Bartholomew blinked, his tiny pigeon heart fluttering in his chest. A kraken? In his peaceful retirement? This wasn't part of the retirement package. He'd specifically negotiated for a kraken-free existence, a clause which he recalled had caused some confusion among the royal negotiators. He'd reasoned that a kraken, even a slightly misunderstood one, could disrupt the serene tranquility of his retirement, potentially destroying his meticulously crafted dovecote and causing widespread panic among his fellow pensioners. He eyed the package with suspicion, cautiously pecking at the velvet. It felt oddly squishy, He remembered the time he'd delivered a crate of enchanted sausages, only to discover they were, in fact, very disgruntled miniature gremlins disguised as breakfast meats. This, he thought, might be similar. The dragonfly, sensing Bartholomew's hesitation, let out an annoyed buzz and proceeded to tap the package with its tiny leg, which caused a rather loud, squelching sound to emanate from within. Bartholomew, despite his years of experience, felt a shiver of trepidation. This was no ordinary delivery. He carefully unwrapped the velvet, revealing a small, rather slimy-looking creature with an uncanny resemblance to a miniature octopus. It had 8 tentacles, oversized eyes, and an expression of profound, existential disappointment. It stared at Bartholomew with an intensity that was both unsettling and strangely sympathetic. I believe I'm in the wrong place," the kraken squeaked, its voice surprisingly high-pitched. "I ordered a self-cleaning enchanted seashell from that website. Mermaids and more. I was expecting something more seashell-like. This is an unfortunate misunderstanding. Apparently, they mixed up my order with an order for a rather disgruntled, albeit miniature, kraken." Bartholomew, momentarily speechless, could only stare. A kraken complaining about a mixed-up online order? This topped even the exploding gingerbread men incident. He knew in that moment that his retirement, while initially idyllic, was not going to be as peaceful as he'd hoped. The dragonfly, seemingly exhausted from its unusual delivery, simply drifted off to nap on a nearby sunflower. Bartholomew, with a sigh, realized he had one last, unexpected delivery to handle. The slightly misunderstood kraken needed to be returned, which meant another adventure involving disgruntled mermaids. A hastily assembled raft, fashioned from discarded seed shells, and a very confused seagull who kept insisting the kraken was, in fact, a particularly large, unusually intelligent shrimp. His retirement, it seemed, was anything but peaceful. Yet, as he prepared for this last, chaotic adventure, a flicker of amusement danced in his eyes. After all, retirement wasn't about quietude. It was about embracing the unexpected, even if it involved returning a miniature, slightly disgruntled kraken to a very irate mermaid. The purple ink in his golden quill pen seemed to shimmer in agreement, ready to record the latest and possibly most absurd chapter in the chronicles of medieval e-commerce. The legend of Bartholomew, the pigeon who delivered it all, was far from over. His final delivery, it seemed, would become yet another legendary tale whispered amongst the barnyard animals and the royal court alike, a testament to the enduringly chaotic nature of medieval online shopping and the enduring spirit of a retired courier pigeon. The story would continue, weaving a tapestry of hilarious mishaps and unexpected adventures, a testament to the unpredictable and utterly hilarious world of online shopping in the Middle Ages. The final chapter, however, was far from written. Bartholomew, armed with sunflower seeds, a golden quill, and an unwavering sense of humor, was ready to face whatever chaos awaited him one last time. And so, his tale continued, an ongoing saga of quirky situations, adding to the colorful and always engaging narrative of medieval e-commerce. The impact of medieval online shopping wasn't confined to individual mishaps. It had far-reaching consequences that rippled through the very fabric of medieval society. Take, for instance, the rise of the click-and-mortar blacksmith, old Barnaby, a man whose family had forged swords for generations, found himself struggling to compete with the online retailers selling enchanted weaponry at a fraction of the cost. His solution? He launched his own website, Barnaby's Blades, forged in fire, delivered by dragon, offering personalized weaponry with next-day delivery by a surprisingly punctual, if somewhat fire-breathing dragon. His marketing campaign involved a series of increasingly elaborate demonstrations, culminating in a spectacular display that inadvertently melted a portion of the town's newly renovated market square. It was, however, remarkably effective, boosting his online sales exponentially. The incident did lead to a minor dispute with the town council and a rather extensive insurance claim, but Barnaby considered it a worthwhile investment. The shift in commerce also impacted the culinary arts. The once revered royal chef, Chef Geoffroy, found his position threatened by the burgeoning popularity of meal kits of the month, pre-portioned ingredients, and instructions for medieval feasts, all delivered fresh from the enchanted vegetable gardens of the Goblin King. Chef Geoffroy's attempts to modernize his own cooking, using a surprisingly efficient system of pulleys and counterweights to streamline the preparation of a 20-course meal, were overshadowed by the convenience and, admittedly, superior flavors of the meal kits. His desperate attempt to combat the kits with his own gourmet goblin grub delivery service failed spectacularly when a miscommunication resulted in a shipment of enchanted sausages, the same disgruntled gremlins Bartholomew had encountered, being served to the royal family. The resulting chaos involved a frantic search for tiny, spicy gremlin hunters, which, despite being utterly absurd, was surprisingly documented with great seriousness in the royal chronicles. The legal system, too, was not immune to the digital revolution. The introduction of online contracts, often riddled with archaic legal jargon and incomprehensible clauses, led to a surge in legal disputes. Sir Reginald, having mistakenly purchased a flock of geese instead of his warhorse, an incident already alluded to, I must admit, found himself embroiled in a lawsuit that lasted for years, involving numerous appeals, court jesters providing highly questionable legal advice, and more than one accidental burning of the courthouse due to mishaps with candles and enchanted scrolls. Ultimately, after much deliberation and many comedic courtroom battles, Sir Reginald won the case, not on the basis of sound legal precedent, but because the judge had a surprising fondness for geese and a penchant for mischief, a testament to the unpredictability of the medieval court system even in the digital age. The fashion industry underwent a similar transformation. Agnes, a pioneering designer who once championed the finest silks and wools, now found herself competing with online retailers selling enchanted clothing that could alter color, size, and even magically repair itself, delivered via an elaborate network of enchanted messenger owls, trained strangely enough by a monastery of highly disciplined monks. Agnes's attempts to incorporate technological advancements into her designs, such as self-cleaning tunics and shoes that could magically teleport their wearer to any location within a 50-mile radius, resulted in many wardrobe malfunctions, though the teleporting shoes did lead to a series of hilarious adventures and accidental appearances in unexpected locations. It became a crucial chapter in medieval fashion innovation. Furthermore, the rise of online marketplaces fostered a new breed of entrepreneurs. Consider young Thomas, a former stable boy who, utilizing his knowledge of horses and a surprising aptitude for e-commerce, created a wildly successful business selling enchanted horse harnesses. His innovative marketing techniques, which involved creating a series of viral videos featuring a team of exceptionally well-trained and photogenic horses demonstrating the products, catapulted him to fame and fortune, proving that even in the medieval world, a good marketing strategy could conquer all. The success, however, did lead to many copycats, which eventually resulted in Thomas launching a line of anti-counterfeiting charms, further expanding his digital empire. The consequences weren't solely economic or social. They also had significant impacts on the environment. The increased demand for delivery services, resulting from the popularity of online shopping, led to a surge in the medieval courier pigeon population. This, in turn, resulted in an unexpected boom in the sunflower seed industry and a renewed focus on pigeon welfare. The creation of the Pigeon Welfare Society, PWS, a surprisingly effective lobbying group, led to legislation for improved working conditions for courier pigeons, including shorter flight distances, mandatory naps, and even health insurance. This unexpected side effect was documented in detail by scholars and historians, becoming a pivotal illustration of unforeseen consequences in the medieval period. The social lives of individuals were also significantly impacted by the changes. Courtly love evolved a new dimension, with digital suitors wooing their heart's desires with virtual gifts of enchanted trinkets delivered via enchanted doves. The popularity of online dating services, offering matches based on personality traits, determined by incredibly complex astrological calculations and preferences for enchanted weaponry, resulted in many unexpected pairings, forming the basis for many legendary stories and ballads sung in taverns and royal courts alike. Even the religious sphere was affected. The church, initially resistant to the new technology, eventually adapted by launching its own online donation platform, offering blessed digital amulets and virtual indulgences. This digital approach attracted a new wave of followers and greatly increased the religious institution's access to resources and donations. The unexpected alliance with digital innovation expanded the church's influence and allowed it to remain relevant in the changing times. But the most significant legacy of medieval online shopping was its enduring unpredictability. The combination of archaic beliefs and cutting-edge, for its time, technology created a world where the expected was constantly being challenged, where a simple online purchase could result in a series of hilarious misadventures, from exploding gingerbread men to disgruntled gremlins masquerading as sausages, from fire-breathing dragons delivering enchanted blades to teleporting shoes causing chaos throughout the kingdom. The medieval online shopping revolution left an indelible mark on the world, a testament to the unpredictable intersection of tradition and technology, humor and history. The stories, both grand and absurd, continue to be told in taverns, around campfires, and across the digital marketplace, a fascinating testament to the enduring absurdity of life, then and now. The future, it seems, will continue to surprise us as much as the past, and perhaps that's the most significant legacy of all. The world of medieval e-commerce, it seemed, was forever changed. A chaotic yet strangely captivating blend of ancient traditions and modern conveniences. A quirky tapestry woven from the threads of unexpected deliveries, hilarious mishaps, and the enduring human capacity for both innovation and utter absurdity. The tale continues,